The seventh handler went into the pit at the 3rd hour of the pale morning, and the whole Warforge stopped breathing to watch him not come out the way he went in. Subwarden Renewsesh stood at the observation rail with the others, 4 fingers hooked over the cold rung, and made himself look. He had watched 6 before this one. He had learned that looking away did not spare you anything. The sound found you regardless, and the sound was worse when you had not seen the shape that made it. So he looked down into the ring, the great sunken bowl of gray stone, open to the sky, flooded with the flat white daylight of Sekoral's noon-bright morning. And he watched the handler named Vorlek walk toward the beast with a shock goad in one hand, and the wrong kind of confidence in his gait. The beast did not move. That was the thing none of them could get used to. A war asset that lunged, that circled, that tested the bars, that they could have understood. This one lay in the center of the ring with its enormous forelimbs crossed, and its head low, and its 6 eyes half-lidded against the light, and it watched the handler approach the way a mountain watches weather. It was the size of a transport skiff. Its hide was the deep slate of wet stone, banded along the spine with plates the color of old iron, and where the plates met the muscle there were seams of paler gray, like the beast had been assembled from cliff faces and never quite finished. The Dralo registry called it specimen VAR9. The handlers, in the low voices they used when the conditioners were not near, called it the breaker, because that was the only word left that fit. "Posture command," said the voice from the tower above them. High Conditioner Osik Vihar, watching from the shaded gallery, his 4 eyes fixed on the readout and not on the animal. "Give it the posture command, Handler Vorlek, first form." Vorlek gave it. Renew heard the goad hum to life, heard the clipped Dralo syllables of the first form command that every asset in the Warforge had been broken to obey since before Renew was hatched. Sit. Present. Submit. The command that turned monsters into tools. The breaker looked at Vorlek and did not sit, and did not present, and did not submit. "Again," said Osik Vihar. Vorlek stepped closer and gave it again, louder, and lifted the goad, and Renew felt the whole gallery lean back from the rail by some small shared instinct, and he wanted to call down to the handler, "Get out. Just walk out. No asset is worth this." But there was no protocol for that, and a subwarden did not speak across a conditioner prime, and so Renew said nothing and watched. He would not describe afterward what happened in the ring. He found he could not. When the other handlers asked him, the ones who had been on the far side, who had only heard it, he told them the true thing, which was that it was very fast and very quiet, and that the beast had not seemed angry. That was the part that stayed with him. There had been no rage in it. Vorlek had lifted the goad, and the breaker had made one decision, the way you might decide to close a door. And then the daylight in the ring was exactly as bright as it had been a moment before, and there were medics running, and the goad was lying on the stone still humming to itself, and the beast had returned to the center of the bowl and lain back down and crossed its forelimbs, and half-lidded its 6 eyes against the noon. It had not even stood all the way up. "Log it," said Osik Vihar, and his voice did not change at all, and that was its own kind of horror. 7th failure of conditioning protocol. Subject remains non-compliant. A pause, while the medics did what medics could do, which today was not much. Convene the decommission board, 1400. I have indulged this animal long enough. The word moved through the gallery like cold through water. Decommission. Renew had been at the Warforge 11 years, and he had heard the word applied to assets that could not be conditioned, and he knew what it meant, and he knew there was a chamber below the ring with a floor that sloped to a drain and machinery in the ceiling that a beast could not outdecide, however fast it was, because it was built precisely so that speed did not matter. They would flood the ring with a gas that took the fight out of the largest asset in 9 breaths, and then they would open the floor, and then specimen VAR9 would go into the chamber that speed could not save it from, and the Warforge would be quiet again, and the 7th handler's family would be told he died advancing the ascendancy's readiness. Renew unhooked his fingers from the rail. They ached. He had been gripping it harder than he knew. Below, in the bright flat light, the breaker lay still and watched the medics carry Vorlek away. And Renew had the disloyal thought, the thought he would never say aloud, not in 11 years, not in 20, that the animal did not look like a thing that had lost 7 fights. It looked like a thing that was waiting for something, and had decided, a long time ago, to be patient about it. The decommission board met at 1400, and did not decommission anything, because at 1340 a message came up from the landing terraces that the human auxiliary had arrived a full day ahead of schedule, and HFY had to decide which humiliation he preferred. Renew was in the anteroom outside the board chamber when the message came, close enough to hear the Conditioner Prime's aide read it out, close enough to watch Ossic's spinal plates rise a hand's width and settle. The humans. Renew had heard the arguments about the humans for a season now, heard them in the mess, heard them in the handler barracks, heard the older warden spit the word Deathworlder like it tasted of rust. The story went like this, as far as any handler below the galleries understood it. The Ascendancy had lost 11 assets to the same failure this past year, not the Breaker's failure exactly, but its cousin. Apex-grade beasts, expensive beasts, beasts that broke conditioning and killed handlers, and could not be made into weapons no matter what was done to them. 11 assets was a fortune. 11 assets was a gap in the line. And someone in the high councils, casting about for anything, had remembered that the newest species to join the coalition, a small, soft, wet-skinned people from a world the survey teams had flagged with a hazard rating so high that half the analysts assumed it was a clerical error, that these humans, of all the beings in the charted arm, were said to have a gift for beasts, not for fighting them, for keeping them, for living beside apex predators, in their homes, on their furniture, and calling them by little names. The councils had asked Earth for a specialist team. Renew had heard, from a warden who had heard it from an adjutant, exactly how the request had been worded. A request for a beast conditioning cadre, weapons grade, to assist with non-compliant apex assets. And he had heard what Earth had sent in reply, and the whole mess hall had gone quiet when the warden told it, because it was either an insult or a joke, and no one could decide which. Earth had not sent a conditioning cadre. Earth had sent 4 people from something called a kennel corps, which the translation matrices rendered, unhelpfully, as a house for dogs. 3 of them were what the humans called handlers. One of them, the manifest said, was an apprentice. They sent us their dog keepers, a warden had said in the mess to general and ugly laughter. We asked for a weapon and they sent us their dog keepers. Renew had not laughed. He was not sure why. Something in it had sat wrong with him, the way a note sits wrong before you know the song is sad. But he had not laughed, and now he stood in the anteroom while HFY decided whether to postpone the killing of the Breaker in order to let 4 wet-skinned beast keepers look at it first. And Renew found that he was, against all his training and all his sense, quietly glad of the delay. "Bring them up," said HFY in the tone of a being agreeing to swallow a stone. "Let them see the animal. Let them see what a real apex is, and let them understand why their toys and their little names are worth nothing here. Then we decommission it at first light tomorrow, and I will note in the record that the human method was consulted and found wanting." He rose. His plate settled. "See that the apprentice in particular gets a good long look. I am told the young ones from that world are sentimental. It will do them good to learn early what the galaxy actually is." Renew inclined his head, because that was what you did, and went to fetch the humans, and did not yet know that he was walking toward the single strangest thing he would witness in a life that had, by then, already contained a great deal. The humans came up the terrace stair in the noon light, and the first thing Renew noticed was how small they were, and the second thing he noticed was that only 3 of them were looking at the Warforge. The 3 handlers looked at everything, the black basalt walls, the gold racks, the gallery of an empire that broke living weapons for a living, and Renew could read the tension in them even across the species gap, the way soldiers hold themselves in a place built by people who might not be friends. Their leader was a woman with a hard, tired face and short iron-colored hair, and an old coat the color of ash, and she gave her name as Doyle, Captain, Earth Auxiliary Corps, and shook Renew's four-fingered hand with a grip that told him the softness of humans was a rumor put about by people who had never touched one. The fourth human was not looking at the Warforge. She was small even by the standard of her small people, young, Renew thought, though he was poor at reading human ages, young in the way of someone who has not yet been made hard by everything that is going to happen to them. Plain-faced, brown hair pulled back and coming loose at the edges, a canvas jacket a size too large, the sleeves turned back twice at the wrists. She carried a worn duffel over one shoulder, and she walked a half-step behind the others with the particular quiet of a person who has learned that the world runs more smoothly when you do not take up space in it. Doyle had introduced her without turning around, and this is Corin, she's our apprentice, she's along to learn. And the young woman had said nothing at all, only nodded and kept her eyes on the ground, and Renew had thought, sentimental, yes, Ossic will be pleased, this one will weep at the sight of the ring. But now they had climbed to the level of the observation gallery, where the flat noon light poured down into the great gray bowl, and the young woman named Corin had stopped. She had stopped the way an animal stops, not the way a person stops when they are tired or thinking. All at once, mid-step, one boot still lifted, her whole body arrested, and Renew, who spent his days watching apex predators go still, recognized the stillness before he understood it, and something cold walked up the seams of his spine. She was looking down into the ring. Renew followed her gaze. Down in the bowl in the center, the breaker lay with its forelimbs crossed and its head low and its 6 eyes half-lidded against the noon, exactly as it had lain since morning, exactly as it had lain for the 11 days since they had brought it here, a mountain waiting for weather. Then the breaker lifted its head. Renew had seen the beast lift its head perhaps a dozen times in 11 days, and every time it had been the slow, contemptuous survey of a thing deciding whether something was worth the trouble of a decision. This was not that. This was fast, faster than a thing that size should move without violence in it, and it was not a survey. The great slate head came up and around and oriented, with the awful precision of a weapon and none of a weapon's coldness, on the small woman in the too large jacket standing frozen at the rail. The 6 eyes came fully open. And down the whole length of the beast, along the banded spine and the crossed forelimbs and the vast slow flanks, a change moved that Renew had no word for and would spend a long time trying to find one, a settling, a loosening, the way a fist you have held so long you have forgotten it is a fist finally opens. "Don't," said Captain Doyle very quietly, and Renew realized she was not speaking to the beast. She had turned. She was watching her apprentice with an expression Renew could not read. "Corin, Nell, look at me. Whatever you think you're—" The young woman was not listening. She had let the duffel slide off her shoulder. It hit the stone and she did not hear it. She had taken one step toward the rail, both hands coming up to grip it, and her plain young face had broken open into something enormous and wordless, and Renew saw that she was not going to weep at the ring the way Ossic had promised. She was going to say something. She opened her mouth, and down in the bright bowl the beast that had broken 7 handlers came up onto its forelimbs in a single fluid rise, and the whole gallery scattered back from the rail with a clatter of dropped goads and startled cries, and Ossic Vihar's voice cracked out from the high gallery. "Containment. Get containment on that." And in the half-second of chaos, in the flat white noonlight of Sequoral, before anyone could stop her, the small human woman leaned over the rail toward the largest and most dangerous animal in the Warforge, and she made a sound. It was not a Drelo word. It was not a command. It was two soft syllables in her own wet-skinned tongue, and the translation matrix in Renew's collar, which rendered every language in the coalition, hesitated over it and then declined to translate it at all, because it was not a word in any language the matrix knew. It was a name. Renew knew it was a name the way you know a face in a crowd before you know whose it is. He knew it from the shape of it in her mouth and the way she gave it, not thrown, not shouted, but offered, the way you say a thing you have said 10,000 times to something you love and have not seen in longer than you can bear. Two syllables, soft on the first, falling on the second. And down in the ring, the breaker specimen VAR9, the asset that had never once in the Warforge's records made a vocalization louder than a breath, the beast that killed in silence and lay in silence and had swallowed 7 handlers into that silence. The breaker lifted its vast head toward the small human at the rail, and out of a throat built to end things, low and rough and unmistakable, it gave the sound back. The same 2 syllables. Soft on the first, falling on the second. It said the name. Renew Sesh had stood at that rail for 11 years and had believed, in the settled way of a being who has seen the worst thing a place can do, that there was nothing left in the Warforge that could surprise him. He stood now with his 4 fingers frozen on the cold rung, and every plate on his body lifted, and he listened to an apex war beast speak a human name in a human voice across a gulf of years and species and pain, and he understood, all at once and far too late, that the Ascendancy had asked Earth for a weapon, and Earth had not misunderstood the request at all. Earth had simply sent the only thing in the galaxy that could answer it. For a moment nobody in the gallery moved, and the only sound in all that black stone was the small human woman breathing in ragged pulls with both hands pressed over her mouth, and the vast slow breathing of the beast below, which had lain down at once, the instant it finished the name, and pressed its enormous head as close to the ring wall beneath her as the wall allowed, so that it was as near to her as it could get, and no nearer. And it lay there and looked up at her, and did not make another sound. Then HFY came down the gallery stair, and the moment ended. Renew felt the conditioner prime arrive the way you feel a change in pressure. HFY was old for a Dralo and enormous with it, his spinal plates scarred pale from 100 asset corrections, and he crossed the gallery with the unhurried certainty of a being who had never in his life needed to hurry, and he stopped at the rail beside the human woman and looked down at his beast, and Renew watched him try to make what he was seeing fit into a shape he already owned. "What," said HFY, "did you do to my asset?" The human woman did not answer. She was shaking. Captain Doyle stepped in front of her, quiet and hard, and said, "She didn't do anything. She said a word. It answered her." "Yes." "That animal," said HFY, and now his voice did change, thinned by something Renew had never once heard in it, "has not vocalized above a breath in 140 days of records. It has killed 7 of my handlers. It has broken every form of the conditioning. And your apprentice leans over my rail and it speaks to her like a—" He stopped. He did not have the word. His people did not keep beasts, they made them. There was no Dralo word for what the sound had been. "Like a dog that missed her," said Doyle. "That's the word you're looking for. It's one of ours." Renew saw HFY's 4 eyes cut to the captain, and he braced for the correction, the crushing of the soft-skinned insolence. And it did not come, because the conditioner prime was, whatever else he was, not a fool, and a being who has spent his life reading the interior state of dangerous animals does not need it explained to him when he is looking at something that has changed the ground under his feet. He turned to the young woman instead. "You," he said, "apprentice. You will tell me how you know that animal." And Renew, watching, saw the young woman named Nelcorin lower her hands from her mouth and lift her chin and look the high conditioner of the Sequoral Warforge in his 4 eyes, and he saw that HFY had been exactly wrong about her in exactly the way that was going to cost him. He had looked at her smallness and her silence and her downcast eyes and read weakness, read sentiment, read a soft young thing that would weep at the ring. But the beast had lifted its head, and the soft young thing had gone somewhere else entirely. And what stood at the rail now was quiet the way the beast was quiet, and Renew understood with a slow, cold certainty that he was looking at two of the same thing, and that only one of them had ever been in a cage. "His name is Barley," she said. Her voice was low and even, and it did not shake any more. "I raised him from a pup. I've had him since I was 8 years old. A breath. And you're going to want to take your people back from that rail, because he doesn't like it when strangers stand over me, and he is very, very fast." They did not decommission anything at first light. By first light, the Warforge was a different place than it had been, though most of it did not yet know how much, and Renew Sesh spent the night in the middle of it, because it fell to the subwardens to manage the 1,000 small collisions between the human way and the Drelo way, and there were a great many of those, and every one of them taught Renew something he had not wanted to learn about his own people. The first collision was the simplest and the ugliest. Osik Vihar had ordered the humans confined to guest quarters for the night and the beast left in the ring under standard containment, and the human called Doyle had said, flatly, "No. You don't understand what you've got down there," Doyle had said, in the anteroom, with two of Osik's wardens at the door and the noonlight long gone to the gray dusk of Sequiral's brief evening. "That animal has been alone in a hole for years thinking she was dead. She just leaned over a rail and it found out she isn't. You put her in a room on the far side of this fortress tonight and leave it down there in the dark wondering if it imagined her. And I promise you, conditioner, whatever it did to your 7 handlers, it will do to your walls. You cannot build a box strong enough. We've seen it on our world. You do not separate them tonight." "That asset," Osik had said, "does not leave the ring." "Then she doesn't leave the rail," Doyle had said. "Your choice." And that was how Renew Sesh had come to spend the longest night of his career, sitting on the cold gallery floor beside a human apprentice who would not leave the rail, keeping watch over an apex war beast that would not stop looking up at her, while below them in the ring the breaker, Barley, Renew made himself think. The name was Barley, lay pressed to the wall beneath the young woman and slept, in stretches, the way Renew had never seen it sleep, deep and slack and unguarded, waking every little while to lift its head and check that she was still there, and then putting its head back down. He always did that, the young woman said, somewhere in the black middle of the night. She had not spoken in an hour. Renew had assumed she was asleep. Checked. Even when he was small enough to sleep on my chest, he'd wake up every hour and put his nose against my throat to feel me breathing and then go back to sleep. A pause. He wasn't ever small for long, though. He was the size of a farm dog by the 2nd month and the size of a pony by the 6th, and after that he slept on the floor next to the bed because he didn't fit on it, but he still put his nose against my throat every hour. My whole childhood. Every hour all night, this thing that could have taken the roof off the house, checking to make sure I was still breathing. Renew did not know what to say. His people did not have this. He said, Where were you?" "A place called Vesper's Landing," she said. "You won't have it on your charts, or if you do it'll have a different name and a hazard rating. It was a human settlement on the far edge of the Reach, one of the deep frontier ones, the ones they seeded before the coalition maps caught up. Farms, mostly. My family had grain and a few hundred head of stock. It was—" She stopped. When she went on, her voice had gone carefully flat, and Renew, who had learned to read the flatness in dangerous animals, understood that she was holding something enormous very still so that it would not move. It was a good place, and it was on a death world the way all our places are, and we didn't think about that because you don't when it's home. You don't think apex predator. You think the thing in the back pasture that eats the grain thieves. You think good, something's keeping the numbers down. "The beast," Renew said. "You found the beast." "I found a pup," she said, "in the drainage ditch behind the north field in a storm, screaming. Something had come through and killed the—" She used a word the Matrix rendered as pack mother, and then a word it rendered as den, and then she was quiet a moment. There'd been a whole pack denning in the hills above our farm for as long as anyone remembered. They never touched the stock and they never touched us. They took the things that took the stock, and everybody in the valley knew you left them alone and they left you alone. And that was the arrangement, and it had held for 100 years. And then one season a survey team came through the reach cataloging apex species for the coalition registries, and they flagged the hills, and 3 weeks later a collection ship came and harvested them. That's the word the report used when we finally got to see the report. Harvested, apex-grade breeding stock, high conditioning value. They took the whole pack, every adult, for the Warforges. She turned her head and looked at Renew in the dark, and there was nothing in her face he could stand to look at directly. For places like this one. And they missed one, Renew said. They missed one, she said. A pup thrown down a drainage ditch in the panic, too small to be worth the trouble of chasing. I found him the next morning. He fit in both my hands. She looked back down into the ring, where the vast slate shape breathed slow against the wall. I named him Barley because he was the color of the grain when it turns in the autumn, gray-gold before we cut it. My mother said we couldn't keep an apex. My father said we could not keep a screaming orphan on a farm full of stock. It'd draw every scavenger in the valley. So we kept him. And he grew up thinking he was a farm dog, because that's the only thing he ever saw. And to the day they took him, he'd have laid down and died before he let anything touch me, or the stock, or the little ones down the valley. And the only thing anyone in Vesper's Landing was ever afraid of was that he'd sit on you. Renew sat with that in the dark for a long moment. Below, the beast lifted its head, checked, and lay back down. They took him too, he said. The collectors came back. No, she said, and the flatness cracked just at the edge just for a word. No. They didn't come back for him. She did not say the rest, and Renew did not ask, and the beast below them slept and woke and checked and slept, and the pale sequoial dawn came up gray and then white over the black walls of the Warforge, and somewhere in the fortress Osik Vihar was already convening the argument that would decide whether any of it mattered. The argument, when it came, was about ownership, because the argument was always, in the end, about ownership. They convened in the board chamber below the ring, a low, wide room of black stone with a long table and a wall of daylight panels flooding it bright and clean, and a viewing pane in the floor through which the ring itself was visible, so that the board could deliberate the fate of an asset while looking down at it. Renew had never been permitted in the chamber before. He was permitted now only because Osik wanted a subwarden present who had witnessed the whole of the previous day, and because the humans had refused to convene at all unless the young woman was allowed to bring the beasts. The humans used the word records, and the Dralo had no idea what they meant, until Doyle laid a battered data slab on the black table, and it lit up with images. Renew had not known there would be images. They were photographs, the human word for captured light, and they were the most ordinary things Renew had ever seen, and he could not stop looking at them. A small human child, 4 or 5 years old, brown hair, gap-toothed, asleep in a patch of yellow sun on a wooden floor with a gray-gold pup the size of a grain sack curled around her, its head on her belly. The same child, older, on the back of a farm cart, one hand buried in the fur of a beast now the size of a draft animal, both of them squinting at whatever human was holding the light catcher. The beast, Barley, lying in a doorway with its chin on the threshold, watching a flock of stock birds it plainly could have ended in a breath, and plainly never would. The child, older still, maybe 10, sitting on the porch steps reading aloud from a paper book to a beast whose head was now bigger than she was, and the beast lying with its 6 eyes half-lidded, and its great flank rising and falling, listening. "That," said Doyle quietly into the silence of the Dralo board, "is your specimen VAR9, that's your breaker. That's the asset that killed 7 of your handlers." She let the images turn. "We wanted you to see it before you voted on killing it. We wanted you to understand what you actually have down there because you have been trying to condition it for years and you never understood the first thing about it. And the first thing is this. it was never wild. You didn't capture an apex predator. You stole a little girl's dog. Asik Vihar looked at the turning images for a long time, and Renu watched him do it. And Renu, who had served the Conditioner Prime for 11 years and thought he knew the whole small grammar of the being's moods, saw something cross the four eyes that he could not name, and then saw it put away, folded and stored, the way Asik folded and stored everything that did not serve the work in front of him. A charming history, Asik said at last, and irrelevant. Irrelevant, Doyle repeated. You have shown me that the animal was raised in captivity by a soft people who did not understand what they were holding. Asik gestured at the images with 2 fingers, dismissing them, dismissing the child and the sunlit floor and the beast's chin on the doorway. This is not an argument for the animal's value. It is an explanation of its defect. The asset will not accept conditioning because it was imprinted in infancy on this female. That is a flaw. Flaws in assets are corrected or the assets are decommissioned. You have simply told me the origin of the flaw. You have not told me why I should not still remove it. And this was the moment. Renu would think later, when the whole thing turned not on the beast, and not on the images, but on a single fact about the Conditioner Prime that everyone in the chamber understood at the same instant, and that Asik himself understood a half-breath too slowly. Because Asik Vihar had just called the imprinting a flaw, and Asik Vihar had 11 other assets in the ground, harvested at cost, conditioned at cost, and lost, every one of them non-compliant, every one of them a fortune poured into a hole. And if the imprinting was the flaw, then the flaw was the same flaw, and the young woman with the images had just, without meaning to, explained to the High Conditioner of the Sekral Warforge why every apex he had ever tried to break had broken him instead. You could not condition loyalty into a thing. You could only condition fear, and fear made a weapon that hated you, that waited, that lay in the center of the ring with its forelimbs crossed, being patient about it. The humans had not brought a technique. They had brought a diagnosis, and the diagnosis was that the entire ascendancy method was building weapons that were only ever waiting for the chance to be pointed the other way. Renu watched Asik arrive at this. He watched the folding and the storing. And he watched, with a slow, dawning dread, the Conditioner Prime look up from the images and across the black table at the small human woman, and he watched a new idea come into the four eyes and settle there, and it was worse than the killing idea, because it was patient. Unless, said Asik Vihar, the flaw is a key. Nobody spoke. You say the animal obeys you, Asik said to the young woman. You, only you. It will not take conditioning from my handlers, but it took a word from you across a rail and lay down like a dog. He said the human word with distaste and precision. Then the problem is not that the asset cannot be commanded. The problem is only that I have been trying to command it through the wrong throat. He leaned forward and the daylight panels caught the pale scars on his plates. You will remain at the Warforge, apprentice. You will serve as the asset's handler. It obeys you, you will obey me. And through you at last, VAR9 becomes the weapon it was collected to be. This is a generous resolution. It preserves the animal you are so attached to. It preserves my asset. Everyone keeps what they value. He sat back, satisfied, a being who had found the shape that let him own the situation. I will have the papers drawn. Renu looked at the young woman. She had gone very still again, the animal stillness, the mountain stillness, and Renu braced for tears or fury, or the human version of the thing an asset did before it made one decision. But when Nell Corin answered the High Conditioner of the Sekral Warforge, her voice was almost gentle, and that was somehow the most frightening thing that had happened yet. No, she said. You misunderstand, Asik said. It is not an off. I understand you fine, she said. You want me to turn my dog into your gun. You want me to stand at the edge of your ring and point him at whatever you're afraid of this season, and you think because he loves me he'll do it, and the worst part is you're half right. He would. If I asked him to, he'd do anything I asked him, Up to and including the thing that would kill the last soft part of him, because that's what he is, that's what they all are. They'll pour themselves out to the last drop for the one they've chosen and never once ask if it's fair. She had not raised her voice. She had not stood. Which is exactly why I will never ask him. You harvested his whole family to make weapons. You put him in a hole for years and called it correction. And now you've finally figured out that the only thing that ever worked on him was love, and you want to borrow mine to finish the job his fear couldn't. She shook her head, slow, and the gentleness in it was terrible. No, he's not a weapon. He was never a weapon. He was a farm dog who slept in a little girl's doorway, and you're the ones who couldn't tell the difference, and that is not my flaw to fix. The chamber was silent. Down through the viewing pane in the floor, the beast lay in the bright ring, watching the daylight, and Renew somehow knew, waiting for the small footsteps to come back. Then we are at an impasse, said Asik Vihar, and the patience had gone out of his voice and something older had come into it. Because that asset does not leave this Warforge apprentice. It has killed 7 of my handlers. It is registered war materiel of the Ascendancy, collected under lawful survey, conditioned at the expense of the fleet. It is not a dog. It is property. Your history is charming and it is legally worth nothing. You have 3 choices, and I will name them, and then you will choose. You will handle the asset for the Ascendancy, or you will leave this world tomorrow on your little ship, and the asset will be decommissioned the following morning, and you may spend the rest of your soft, short life knowing you had the chance to save it and chose your principles instead. Or, he spread his 4 fingers on the black stone. You will try to take from me, by force or by law, a piece of Ascendancy property, and you will discover what happens to soft peoples who do that on a Warforged world. Renew had heard Asik make threats for 11 years. He had never heard him make one he meant more. Captain Doyle started to speak. Renew saw her draw the breath, saw the practiced diplomatic weight come into her shoulders, and the young woman put one hand on the captain's arm lightly, and Doyle stopped. "I'll take the 3rd one," said Nelcorin. They gave the humans back their guest quarters that night, and posted 6 wardens on the door, and Renew Sesh was assigned to stand the first watch, which was how he came to be the one the young woman spoke to when she could not sleep. She came to the door and sat down against the frame on the inside, and Renew sat against the frame on the outside, a hand's width of black stone and an open doorway between them, and neither of them said anything for a while. The Warforge was quiet in the way it was only ever quiet at night, the deep basalt quiet of a place built to hold things that wanted out. "You think I'm being a fool," she said finally. "I think," Renew said carefully, "that you have chosen the option the Conditioner Prime least expected, which is rarely foolish and often fatal." She laughed, a short, tired, human sound. Doyle said almost exactly that. She said, "Nell, there's no law we can win here. This is their world and their asset and their courts, and the moment you say force, he's within his rights to put us all in the ground." She pulled her knees up and wrapped her 2 long sleeves around them. "She's right. I know she's right. I'm not planning to fight anyone. I couldn't fight my way out of a paper bag. That's the whole point of me. I'm the small, quiet one who's good with the animals. That's the only thing I've ever been good at. A breath. But I've spent 9 years looking for him, Warden. Do you understand that? 9 years. I was 13 when they took him, and I'm 22 now. And I have spent every one of those years knowing he was alive somewhere in a hole like this one, thinking I was dead, waiting for me, checking every hour of every night for a throat that wasn't there anymore. I joined this corps to get off-world. I took every posting that might put me near a registry, near a warforge, near a collection route. I have looked at 9 years of harvest manifests. And 3 days ago a request came through for a beast auxiliary, and the destination code matched a survey region I'd flagged, and I signed the assignment sheet before Doyle finished reading it out. She turned her head. In the low light her plain young face was wet and perfectly steady. "So no, I'm not leaving tomorrow. He waited 9 years for me. He can wait 1 more day for me to figure out how to get him out." Renew was quiet a moment. Then, because it had been sitting in him since the morning and he could not hold it anymore. He said the disloyal thing, the thing 11 years had taught him never to say. "The other 11, he said, "the assets we lost this year, the ones that broke conditioning and killed handlers and could not be made to serve." He looked at his own 4 hands. "They were all like him, weren't they, taken from somewhere, bonded to something we didn't bother to learn about because we thought a beast was a beast, and we put them in the ground calling it correction, and every one of them was lying in the center of a ring being patient, waiting for a footstep that was never going to come." He made himself finish. "We didn't lose 11 weapons this year, apprentice. We killed 11 grieving animals and told ourselves they were defective." The young woman looked at him for a long moment, and something in her face that had been braced for an enemy set it down. "Yeah," she said softly, "you did." "I helped," Renew said. "It cost him to say it. I stood at the rail and I logged the failures and I convened the boards 11 times. I am telling you this so that you know exactly what I am, before you decide whether to trust me." The young woman studied him in the dark, and Renew waited for the disgust, the recoil, the thing he deserved. It did not come. "You looked away, though," she said. "When they went into the ring, yesterday, I watched you. Everyone else watched the beast because they wanted to see it happen. You looked at the beast because you couldn't stand not to bear witness, and then you looked away because you couldn't stand to watch, and then you made yourself look back. I saw you do it 3 times. She uncurled her sleeves. "You've been sick about this for a long time, Warden. You just didn't have anywhere to put it. That's not nothing. That's the whole difference, actually. That's the difference between him." She nodded down the corridor, toward the galleries, toward Ossic's tower, and you. Renew did not trust himself to answer. "His name's Barley," she said after a while, more gently, as if she were letting him off a hook. "You keep almost saying it and stopping. You're allowed to say it. He'd like you, I think. You're the worrying kind. He always sat closest to the ones who worried." And Renew Sesh, sub-warden of the Sequoral Warforge, sat in the black stone night beside the open door of a soft-skinned deathworlder, and said, quietly, the name of the beast he had helped to cage, and found that it did not feel like a betrayal of the ascendancy at all. It felt like the first true thing he had said in 11 years. In the morning, Ossic, Vihar changed his mind about the killing, and Nell Corin understood at once that this was worse than the killing, because a being who changes his mind has found a new use for you. He summoned them to the ring gallery at the white noon, and stood at the rail with his aides and his subwardens and looked down at the beast, which had spent the night pressed to the wall beneath the place where Nell had slept, and he said, without turning around, "I will give you your test, apprentice." "I didn't ask for one," Nell said. "You did not have to. I require it." He gestured down into the bright bowl. "You claim this asset is harmless in your presence. I have 7 dead handlers who claim otherwise. One of these claims is going to be revised today, and I would prefer it be yours, because a live apprentice is more useful to me than a dead point of principle. So, you will go down into the ring. You will approach the asset. And every being on this gallery will watch what a real apex does when the thing it has been waiting for climbs down into the hole with it. And then we will all know what we are dealing with, and we can stop pretending." Nell heard Doyle inhale beside her, heard the captain start to say the sane thing, the correct thing, the thing that would keep them all alive, and Nell was already unbuttoning the too large canvas jacket, folding it, handing it to Doyle without looking, because there was no version of this in which she did not go down into that ring, and they both knew it, and had known it since the moment the beast lifted its head. "Nell," Doyle said very low, "if you're wrong." "I'm not wrong," Nell said. "I was never wrong about him. I was just too far away." There was a maintenance stair on the north face of the ring, a switchback of black steps down the inside of the bowl, gated at the top with a heavy alloy hatch that 2 wardens had to work together to unseal. They unsealed it because Ossic ordered it unsealed. Nell stepped through onto the top step, and the hatch boomed shut behind her, and then there was nothing between her and the largest predator in the Ascendancy's inventory but 90 steps of black stone and 9 years. She started down. She did not hurry. You never hurried with the big ones. Hurry was prey language. Hurry told the oldest part of them that something was wrong. She went down the switchback at the pace she had walked 10,000 times across a farmyard, unhurried, unafraid, her boots scuffing the grit. And below her in the center of the bowl, the beast that had killed 7 handlers came up off the stone. It came up slowly. It came up the way a thing comes up when it has spent every hour of every night for years teaching itself not to hope, because hope had a footstep and the footstep never came, and it did not quite dare, even now, to believe the footstep was real. It rose onto its 6 great limbs, and it lowered its enormous head, and it took 1 step toward the base of the stair and stopped, trembling. Nell could see the tremor run the length of the banded spine, a shiver in a thing the size of a house, and it made, low in its chest, a sound she had not heard in 9 years and had heard every night in her sleep, the small broken interrogative sound a scarn makes when it is asking a question it is afraid to ask. "Yeah," Nell said, and her voice cracked wide open, and she stopped caring who was watching from the rail. "Yeah, baby, it's me. It's really me." She came off the last step onto the floor of the ring, and the beast crossed the distance between them. And behind her, muffled through the alloy hatch, she heard the gallery cry out, heard the goads whine to life, heard someone shout containment, because to every one of them it looked like the 7 deaths looked. It looked like the fast, quiet decision. It looked like a war beast covering ground toward a small, soft thing that could not possibly survive the arrival. The beast reached her, and lowered its vast slate head, and pressed its brow against her chest so gently that she did not rock back on her heels, and stood there shaking, and made the small sound again. And Nell wrapped both her arms as far around that enormous head as they would go and pressed her face into the seam behind its jaw where the fur was softest and had always been softest, and breathed him in, and felt against her throat the old, old motion, the great blunt nose finding the pulse in her neck. Pressing there, checking, feeling her breathe after 9 years, checking to make sure she was still breathing. "I'm here," she said into the fur over and over, the way you say the true thing to something that has stopped believing in true things. "I'm here, I've got you. I'm here." She did not know how long she stood in the bright bowl holding the head of a monster while it shook. Long enough that the goads on the rail above went quiet, one by one, because there was nothing to use them on. Long enough that the beast's shaking eased, and then stopped, and it let out a breath that stirred the loose hair at her collar and seemed to empty something it had been holding for years. Long enough that when she finally leaned back to look at him, at the 6 eyes, at the gray gold seam she'd have known in the dark, at the small notch out of the left ear fan that a stockbird had given him when he was a pup and too proud to admit it hurt, she found she was laughing, wet and helpless, and the beast was doing the thing he had done since he was small enough to sleep on her chest, leaning his whole impossible weight into her, degree by degree, testing whether she would still take it. The way he used to lean until she toppled over in the grass, and he could stand over her with his tail going, and his enormous stupid face full of triumph. "Don't you dare," she told him, laughing, bracing. "Don't you dare, you're the size of a barn now, you'll flatten me, Barley. Barley. Sit." And the breaker, specimen VAR9, the asset that had never once taken a command in 140 days of records, the beast that had broken 7 handlers and every form of the conditioning, and been marked for the chamber with the sloped floor, the breaker sat. It sat the way a farm dog sits. It dropped its haunches onto the black stone of the Ascendancy Warforge, and it sat with its forelimbs planted, and its 6 eyes fixed on her face and its ear fans forward, and unmistakably, along the great banded ridge of its spine, its whole hindquarters going with the slow, heavy sweep of a thing that did not have a tail so much as a section of geology that had learned to wag. Above, on the gallery, in the bright flat noon, 400 years of Drelo certainty about the nature of beasts fell over quietly and did not get up. In the 2 days between the sit and the arrival of the procurement ascendant, the Warforged did a thing Renew had never seen it do with any asset in 11 years. It came to watch. They came in ones and twos at first, off-duty, casual, pretending to be passing the gallery on other business, and then in larger clusters, and by the second day there was a standing crowd at the main ring rail from dawn to dusk, wardens and conditioners and kitchen staff and cadets, leaning on the rung and watching a small human woman go about the most ordinary business in the galaxy with the most dangerous animal in the fleet. Ossic permitted it. Renew suspected the Conditioner Prime permitted it because a watched crowd was a documented crowd, and Ossic was building his case for the Council's one recorded hour at a time. But Renew also suspected, though he would not have said it, that some part of the old being simply could not look away either. Because it was extraordinary, and it was extraordinary precisely because it was so completely dull. The girl sat in the ring, and the beast lay with its head in her lap, and she read to it. That was the first thing that broke the wardens, that she had asked on the first morning for something to read, and Doyle had brought down a battered human paper book, and the girl had sat on the floor of the ring where 7 handlers had died and read aloud, for 2 hours, in a low, even voice, some human story about a boat, while the breaker lay with its vast head in her lap and its 6 eyes half-lidded, and its great flank rising and falling, listening. The wardens at the rail had waited for something to happen. Nothing happened. She read about the boat. The beast listened. That was the whole of it, and it was the most subversive thing any of them had ever witnessed, because every one of them had been taught from hatching that an apex was a thing that only ever wanted one of 2 states, dominance or submission. And here was a third state their entire civilization had no word for, and it was a woman reading about a boat to a monster in the sun. By the second morning, the handlers had started writing it down. Renew caught the first of them at it, a young warden named Tesk, earnest and literal, standing at the rail with a data slab making careful notations, and Renew leaned over to see and found a meticulous log. Subject permits proximity following a low vocalization repeated at intervals. Renew had asked what he was doing, and Tesk had said with complete sincerity that he was documenting the human handling protocols so that they could be studied and codified, and had shown Renew the entries. The girl scratched the beast under the jaw in a slow, repeated stroke. Tesk had logged it as contact protocol, mandibular, and noted the stroke count. The girl said the word good in her own tongue, in a particular falling tone, whenever the beast did what she wished. Tesk had logged it as verbal reinforcement marker, and was attempting to render the tone in Drelo notation and failing. The girl had, on the second afternoon, thrown a chunk of loose ringstone across the bowl on a whim, and the beast had heaved itself up and gone and fetched it and brought it back and dropped it in her lap and stood there with its whole hindquarters going, waiting for her to do it again, and 11 wardens at the rail had gasped as one, and Tesk had written, in a hand that shook slightly with the importance of it, a full page, and titled the page in careful capitals, Object Retrieval Doctrine. Renew had not corrected him. He had thought about it and decided against it, because there was something in the earnest, literal young warden solemnly codifying a game of fetch into military doctrine that was, Renew felt, closer to the truth than anything the Warforged had ever written down. They had spent 200 years documenting how to break these creatures. Let them spend 2 days documenting a woman playing catch. It could only be an improvement. They're going to have a whole manual by the end of the week, the girl said, when Renew told her about Tesk's object retrieval doctrine, and she laughed, the short, tired human sound that Renew had learned meant she was, for the moment, all right. Tell him he's missing the most important protocol. Which is? That there isn't one, she said, scratching the beast under the jaw in a slow, repeated stroke that a young warden 2 levels up was at that moment logging as contact protocol, mandibular. That's the whole thing they can't write down because it's not a technique. It's just you show up every day and you're kind and you keep your word, and you do it for years before it's ever tested, and then one day the thing you were kind to walks through a wall for you and everybody acts surprised. She looked up at Renew. You can't doctrine that, Warden. There's no shortcut. That's why it terrified your whole fleet the second they understood it. It's not that we have a weapon they can't build. It's that we have a thing they can't build, and it took us 100,000 years of being kind to animals that could kill us to make it, and there's no manual, and you can't steal it, and you can't rush it, and it only works if you actually mean it. She went back to the slow stroke. Which, I'm starting to think, is exactly what's about to make some very powerful people on this station very unhappy. She was right, of course. Renew felt it building the way you feel whether build over a ring, in the frequency of the sealed transmissions coming and going from Osic's tower, in the sudden arrival of oversight officers who had no business at a routine warforge, in the change that came over the Conditioner Prime himself, who had begun the 2 days grim and ended them with the terrible almost smile Renew had come to dread. Osic had told the councils they had solved the asset problem. The councils had heard him. And somewhere out among the day-blue stars, Renew understood. Something had turned towards Sequoral and begun to move. Something that had done the same arithmetic Osic had done and reached the same conclusion and wanted, very badly, to own it. And the only thing standing between that something and the thing it wanted was a small woman in a too large jacket reading a story about a boat to a monster, who had already told everyone who would listen that the thing they wanted could not be owned, and whom no one with any power had yet troubled to believe. On the morning of the 3rd day, the procurement ascendant ship came down through the flat white noon and settled on the terraces like a blade laid on a table, and the 2 good days were over. Renew Sesh watched the beast sit, and watched the young woman scratch the underside of its jaw while it leaned into her hand hard enough to move her boots on the stone, and he understood that everything had just gotten much more dangerous, and that almost no one on the gallery understood why. They thought they were safe now. He could feel the relief move through the wardens around him. The animal was tamed. The animal took a command. The killing was averted. The crisis was a crisis no longer. They were wrong in the ordinary way. But Osic Vihar was not relieved, and Renew, who had learned to watch the Conditioner Prime the way you watch weather over a ring, saw exactly what was moving behind the 4 eyes as they tracked the small human and the enormous obedient beast, and it was not relief, and it was not defeat. It was arithmetic. Note the time, Osic said quietly to his aide. First successful command response from VAR-9, and prepare a transmission for the procurement ascendant, priority of the fleet. He watched the beast press its head into the girl's hands. Tell them we have solved it. Solved what conditioner? The aide asked. The asset problem, said Osic Vihar, all of it. Every non-compliant apex in every ring on every Warforged world. He turned from the rail, and for the first time in 11 years Renew saw the Conditioner Prime almost smile, which was the single most frightening thing Renew had ever seen him do. We have been trying to break these animals for 200 years. It never worked, and now I know why, and the humans told me themselves. You cannot condition an apex into a weapon. But you can raise one into a weapon if you have the right imprint, and there is exactly 1 people in the charted arm who can produce the imprint. He let that settle. We asked Earth for a cadre. We were thinking too small. We do not need their soldiers, and we do not need their conditioners. We need their children. Renew felt the cold go all the way down. The procurement ascendant arrived on the 3rd day, and Nell disliked her within the first minute, which she counted later as one of the more useful minutes of her life, because it told her exactly what she was dealing with before the being had finished being polite. Her name was Vale Soon, and where Osic Vihar was old and scarred and openly contemptuous, the procurement ascendant was younger and smoother and warm as a knife left in the sun. She came into the observation gallery in robes the pale gold of the daylight panels, and she looked down into the ring at the beast lying with its head in the young woman's lap. Nell had been permitted now to spend her days in the ring, because Osic had learned that a content beast was a manageable one, and Nell had allowed it because every hour with barley was an hour they could not take back. And the procurement attendant put both her hands over her chest in what the Matrix rendered as a gesture of deep respect, and said, "Extraordinary, truly. In 400 years of the program, I have never seen an asset at peace. You have given us a gift, Handler Korin, and the Ascendancy does not forget its gifts." "I didn't give you anything," Nell said. "You gave us understanding," said Vale Soon warmly, "which is worth more than any single asset. Come, walk with me. I would like to discuss the future, and I think you will find the Ascendancy more generous than my colleague has led you to expect." They walked the high gallery in the noon light, the human woman and the golden alien, and 3 steps back, Subwarden Renew Sesh, whom the procurement attendant had waved along as a translator and forgotten about, which Renew was learning was the most useful thing a subwarden could be. Below them, the beast tracked Nell's small figure along the rail, moving beneath her through the bowl so as to stay under her, the way it had done every hour since she came. "Here is what I see," said Vale Soon. "I see a young woman who loves an animal, and an empire that has been breaking animals for 2 centuries because it did not know any other way. And I see in the 2 of you the end of all that breaking. No more rings, no more decommissions, no more dead handlers." She said it beautifully. She said it like a mercy. The apex assets do not have to be broken. They can be raised, bonded, as your barley was bonded in gentleness from infancy, to a handler they will pour themselves out for gladly. It is more humane in every respect. And you, Handler Korin, your people, are the only ones who can teach us how. "You want us to raise your weapons for you," Nell said. "I want to end the suffering of a program that has caused a great deal of it," said Vale Soon, and the terrible thing Nell thought was that some part of her believed it, some part of her meant it. "The Ascendancy will pay any price. Earth may name its terms. A standing exchange, human imprint handlers, raised alongside the young assets, forming the bond in infancy as you did, so that we field weapons that love their handlers instead of hating them. Volunteers, well compensated, honored, think of it. You would spare thousands of these creatures the ring. Is that not exactly what you want?" And Nell stopped walking, and looked out over the bright bowl at the beast that had waited 9 years in a hole for her footstep, and she felt the shape of the offer close around her like a beautiful trap, because it was the trap that came wearing the face of the thing you wanted. "Let me make sure I understand," she said slowly. "You take a human child, give her a scarn pup, let them grow up together, let her love it, let it love her, the whole thing, the sleeping on the chest and the nose against the throat every hour all night, all of it, real as mine. And then you point them at your wars. You'd raise the love on purpose so you could spend it." She turned and looked at the procurement attendant, and her plain young face was very calm. "You'd manufacture what I have. You'd farm it. I would honor it." "You'd farm it," Nell said. "You looked at the one thing your empire couldn't build, the one thing that's worth anything, and your first thought was how to put it on a production line." She shook her head slow. "No, and I'll tell you why no, because I don't think you can hear it any other way. What I have with him isn't a technique. It isn't transferable. It isn't a resource your fleet can procure. It's the whole reason he's worth having, and the second you try to grow it on purpose to spend it in your rings, you've killed the thing that made it work, and you'll be right back to a hole full of grieving animals waiting to be pointed the other way, except now they'll be grieving children too." She stepped back from the rail. "We don't send our love to your quartermasters, Ascendant. That's not a thing humans do." Vale Soon was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, the warmth had thinned, just slightly, the way sunlight thins when something passes across it. "You misunderstand the nature of the conversation, Handler Korin. I did not come here to ask Earth's permission. I came to inform your captain of an arrangement the councils have already found agreeable in principle. The soft-skinned peoples do so love to imagine they are being consulted." She smiled with her whole face and none of her eyes. "The asset in that ring is Ascendancy property. You are, at present, a guest on an Ascendancy world at the pleasure of an Ascendancy warforge. And the bond you are so proud of, that you insist cannot be farmed, I think you will find, when the pressure is correctly applied, that it makes you and your people very cooperative indeed, because you would do anything for that animal. You said so yourself in the board chamber. It is in the record." Her voice was gentle again, and gentle was so much worse. "You would pour yourself out to the last drop for the one you have chosen. And now the ascendancy knows exactly which throat to command you through." Renew watched the young woman hear that, and he watched her not flinch, and he understood that Vale soon had just made the same mistake Ossic had made, only larger, and had made it in the same place. She had looked at the softness and read weakness, when the softness was the death world, when the softness was the single hardest thing in the charted arm, and had never once been in a cage. "You should talk to my captain," Nell agreed quietly. "You really should." The Warforged changed again that night, more quietly than before, and Renew felt it the way you feel a hull flex, a deep structural sound below the threshold of hearing, the sound of a thing built to be one shape beginning, under load, to want to be another. It started in the mess. Renew went down for the evening meal because a sub-warden who stopped appearing in the mess was a sub-warden being talked about, and he found the long room split without anyone having drawn the line. On one side sat the older wardens, the career beings, the ones who had spent decades at the rails and had the most to lose, and they ate in a hard silence, and their plates rattled with the pressure of things they would not say. On the other side, without seeming to have chosen it, sat the young ones Tesk among them, the earnest literal boy with his data slab and his object retrieval doctrine, and they were not silent at all. They were arguing, low and fast, the way the young argue when they have just discovered that a thing they were raised to believe is not only wrong but has been wrong the entire time, at cost, in front of them, while they logged it. "He walked through a wall for her," Tesk was saying, when Renew passed close enough to hear. "I documented it. I have the timestamps. And now the Golden One wants to, what, take the girl and study the you can't study it. I've been trying to write it down for 2 days and there's nothing to write. It's just that she's kind to it and she means it." "Keep your voice down," an older warden said from the other table, not looking up. "Or keep your rank, choose." Tesk kept his voice down. But Renew saw his 4 hands close around the data slab, and he saw the young warden look across the mess at the old ones with an expression that had not been possible in this room a week ago, and he understood that whatever the councils decided, whatever the procurement ascendant did with her warm voice and her patient leverage, the Warforge itself had already begun to lose the argument, one earnest young handler at a time. You could suppress that for a while. You could not condition it out. Renew, of all beings, knew how that ended. He carried a bowl up to the gallery afterward, though he was not hungry, because he had learned that the girl often forgot to eat, and he found her where he expected her, at the rail above the main ring, with the beast pressed to the wall below. "They sent a young handler to me this afternoon," she said without turning when he set the bowl beside her. "Tesk, the one with the slab. He came all the way down to the ring floor first time, hands shaking. You'd have thought he was walking to his own execution, and he stood there about a foot from Barley and asked if he could. He wanted to know if he could touch him." She almost smiled. "I said ask Barley. He didn't understand. I said hold out your hand, palm up, don't reach, let him decide." And Barley sniffed his hand and then leaned his whole head into it, the way he does, and the poor kid nearly fell over, and then he sat down in the dirt and cried for about 10 minutes and apologized the whole time. She was quiet a moment. "He's the one who's been logging everything. He told me he's going to keep the logs no matter what they order. He said," her voice caught just slightly, "he said somebody should write down that it was gentle, that whatever they decide upstairs, there should be a record somewhere that says the most dangerous asset in the fleet was gentle, and that it was gentle because somebody loved it, and that they had it in a hole the whole time and never once tried the one thing that would have worked." Renew sat down beside her at the rail. Below, the beast lifted its head, checked, and lay back down. "There will be a record," Renew said. "I will make sure of it. Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever the Golden One does. That young warden and I," he stopped, and found the shape of the thing he had been circling for days and said it plainly. We are going to be the record apprentice. That is what beings like us are for. When the powerful ones do a terrible thing in the open, we cannot always stop it, but we can refuse to let it be forgotten, and we can refuse to let it be lied about, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes, that turns out to be the thing that stops the next one. He looked down at the beast that had waited 9 years for a footstep. Your captain understands this. It is why she keeps saying every soft-skinned people in the coalition is watching. She is not threatening the ascendancy with a fleet. She is threatening it with witnesses, with a record. With the one weapon your people brought that we genuinely do not know how to fight, because we have never in our history had to. The girl looked at him for a long moment in the gray sequoia dusk. You're going to be all right, Renew Sesh, she said quietly. Whatever happens to you after this, I want you to know that. A being who understands why the record matters is a being who's already most of the way home. She turned back to the rail and reached her hand down toward the bowl, and 90 feet below the beast set one great pad against the wall beneath it. Now eat your dinner. Both of us are going to need our strength tomorrow, and I've watched you skip 3 meals, and I'm not going to be able to concentrate on saving my dog if I'm also worrying about whether the nice, worried alien has eaten. Renew ate his dinner. It was, he reflected, the first order a human had ever given him, and he found, somewhat to his surprise, that he was glad to obey it. Captain Amani Doyle listened to the whole of the procurement ascendant's proposal without moving, in the guest quarters at the white end of the afternoon, and when it was finished, she said one sentence, and Renew, standing again as the forgotten translator by the door, thought it was the most dangerous sentence he had heard in the whole affair, precisely because it was so quiet. You've been in the charted arm, 11,000 years, Doyle said, and we've been in it 11, so I'll allow that you don't know us yet, which means I'm going to tell you one thing about my species one time and I'd write it down. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, an old ash-colored soldier in a room full of golden robes. We come from a world that spent 4 billion years trying to kill everything we love: predators, plagues, ice, fire, each other. And the thing that's wrong with us, the thing your survey teams flagged and couldn't explain, is that it didn't make us hard the way it should have. It made us keep things. We kept the wolves and turned them into dogs. We kept the aurochs, the wildcats, the horses that could break a skull with one kick, and we brought every one of them into our homes and named them and let them sleep in the beds with the children. We are the species that adopted the death world. That's not a weakness in us. That's the whole engine. And you have just informed me that you would like to industrialize it. She smiled, without any warmth at all, and Renew understood where the young woman had learned to be frightening. So here is my counter-proposal, Ascendant. You are going to give that girl her dog, and then we are going to leave. And you are going to spend a long time being very glad that the first thing Earth ever learned about you was that you asked politely before you didn't. Or, said Veilsoon. There's no or, said Doyle. You keep waiting for the or because your whole civilization runs on or's do this, or we hurt this, obey, or we take that. I'm telling you there isn't one. I'm not threatening you. I'm 11 years into the coalition with 4 people and a supply cutter and no leverage you'd respect, and you could put us all in your ring tonight and Earth couldn't do a thing about it for a decade. She stood. I'm just telling you what you'll be after. You'll be the people who found out humans will cross the galaxy for a farm dog and decided to test how far. Every soft-skinned people in the coalition is watching how you treat the newcomers. You're not deciding what happens to us, Ascendant. You're deciding what we all learn about you, and we learn fast. That's the other thing the survey teams flagged. Veilsoon rose in a whisper of gold. You have until the asset's next feeding to reconsider your tone, Captain, she said pleasantly. High Conditioner Vihar has arranged a demonstration for tomorrow's noon, a small proof of the asset's operational readiness, for the record and for the councils. I do hope your apprentice will cooperate. It would be a shame to have to demonstrate the alternative methods of cooperation instead. And she left, gold on black, and the 6 wardens closed the door, and Doyle sat back down and put her weathered face in her hands for exactly 3 seconds, and then took it out again, composed. "Well," she said, "that went about how I thought." "Captain," Renew said from the door. It was not his place to speak. He spoke anyway. "The demonstration tomorrow, I know what it is. I have set up 9 of them." He made himself say it. "Operational readiness. They will put a target in the ring. A live one, a condemned prisoner or a captured raider or one of the other assets they have written off. And they will require the apprentice to command VAR-9 to resolve it, to prove the weapon fires. If she refuses, they will apply a goad to the animal until she stops refusing, because they believe she will stop refusing to spare it pain. That is the whole design. That is how the pressure is correctly applied." He looked at the human captain. "I am telling you so that you can plan. I am telling you because I have stood at the rail for 9 of these and logged them, and I would rather be shot for a traitor than log a 10th. Doyle looked at him for a long moment. "Subwarden," she said. "What's your name, your actual name, not your rank?" "Renew," he said. "Renew Sesh." "Renew Sesh," said Doyle. "You just crossed a line you can't uncross. You understand that. Whatever happens tomorrow, you're not going back to being a good warden of the Ascendancy after this." "I stopped being a good warden of the Ascendancy," Renew said, "the night I learned the beast's name." Nell did not sleep. She sat at the rail above the ring in the gray sequoial night with barley pressed to the wall beneath her. And she did the thing she had learned to do in 9 years of holes and manifests and dead ends, which was to make herself small and quiet, and let the fear move through her without letting it move her. She was not afraid of the demonstration. She had known since the board chamber that it would come to this, that they would try to make her point him, and that she would not, and that they would hurt him to change her mind. She had run it in her head 100 times. The thing they did not know, the thing none of them knew, was the only thing that mattered, and she turned it over in the dark and made her peace with it. "They think you'll do it if I ask," she murmured down into the bowl. The great head lifted, the 6 eyes found her. "They think I've got a leash on you and all they have to do is take the leash. They don't understand that there's no leash. There was never a leash. You just chose me. And a thing that chose you can't be pointed by anybody who didn't earn the choosing." She wrapped her sleeves around her knees. "I'm not going to ask you to hurt anything tomorrow, baby. Not the prisoner, not whoever they drag in, nobody. That's not what you're for. You were never for that. You're for lying in a doorway watching the stock. You're for putting your nose against my throat every hour. That's what you're for." The beast made the small sound low and pressed closer to the wall. "But if they hurt you," Nell said, and her voice did not shake, and that was the most frightening thing about it, "that's different. I won't ask you to do a single thing, but I won't ask you not to either. And they don't know the difference between those two, and tomorrow they're going to learn it, and I'm sorry, because you're going to have to be what they made you for 1 second before you get to be what I made you for the rest of your life. 1 second. Then I'll call you off and you'll come because you always come. Okay?" She pressed her palm flat against the cold rail, and far below in the dark the beast lifted one great forelimb and set the pad of it against the wall beneath her hand, 90 feet down, as close to her as the world would let it get. "Okay, good boy, get some sleep. I'm here, I'm not going anywhere, I'm here." And somewhere in the black hours she did sleep, sitting up against the rail, and when the pale dawn came it found her there, and found the beast below her sleeping too, its great blunt nose still pointed up toward the place where it could feel, however faintly, 90 feet of empty air, and then the small warm weight of the only thing it had ever chosen, breathing. They came for her at the white noon, and they had built the demonstration exactly as Renew had said they would. The gallery was full. Word had gone out. A Warforged did not often have a story like this one, and every warden and conditioner and off-duty handler on Sequoial had found a reason to be at the rail, and among them, Renew noted, were faces that did not belong to the Warforged at all. A cluster of coalition observers in the pale sashes of the Neutral Survey Corps, and a delegation of some scaled, low people Renew did not know, and standing apart, 2 members of the Ascendancy's own oversight tribunal, summoned by Vale soon to witness the operational proof that would justify the whole program going forward. She had wanted an audience. She had gotten one. Renew did not think yet that she understood what she had done. Down in the ring, they had put a target. It was a prisoner, a raider of some kind, gray-scaled, bound at the 4 wrists, hauled to the center of the bright bowl by 2 wardens and left there. And Renew felt the old sickness rise in him at the sight, because he had seen this staging 9 times, and it had never once been anything but murder dressed as science. The prisoner stood in the center of the ring where 7 handlers had died, and did not understand yet what he was for, and the beast lay against the far wall beneath the young woman and watched, and did not move. "Handler Corin," said Osik Vihar from the high rail, his voice carrying flat and clear across the bowl. "You will now demonstrate operational control of the asset. The command is a simple one. You will direct VAR-9 to neutralize the target. The tribunal is watching. Give the command." Nell Corin stood at the rail in her too large canvas jacket, small and plain and perfectly still, and looked down at the bound prisoner and the waiting beast, and said, clearly enough for the whole gallery to hear, "No." The word carried across the bright bowl and up the black walls, and for a moment the whole gallery was silent, and Renew watched Osik Vihar's spinal plates lift a slow hand's width. "I will not repeat myself, apprentice," Osik said, "nor will I pretend you did not understand. You have been given a lawful instruction regarding Ascendancy war materiel. Refuse again, and I will demonstrate to the tribunal why the asset's cooperation has never in the end been optional." He lifted 2 fingers. "Handlers, prepare the goads." 4 wardens came out onto the floor of the ring through the low hatches, and Renew knew them all, and hated in that moment that he knew them all decent enough beings. Doing what the Warforged had taught them was work, each carrying a heavy shock goad already winding up toward its charge. They spread in a slow arc around the beast, keeping their distance, keeping to the drill, and the beast did not so much as turn its head to look at them. It lay against the wall beneath the young woman, and it watched her face, and Renew understood that it was waiting to see what she wanted, and that she was not going to tell it to do anything at all, and that this was the whole terrible plan colliding with the whole terrible truth. "Last chance, apprentice," Osik said. "Give the command, and no one need touch the animal." Nell Corin looked down at the beast, and Renew saw her mouth move, not a command, something small, something for the beast alone, and later, when he learned enough of the human tongue to ask her, she told him what she had said, and it was only this: "I'm sorry. Hold on. I'm here." Then she looked back up at Osik Vihar and said nothing at all. "So be it," said Osik, and dropped his hand, and the nearest warden set the goad against the beast's flank and fired it. Renew made himself watch. He had promised himself he would make himself watch. The beast flinched. That was all at first, a great full-body flinch, the banded muscle jumping under the slate hide, the 6 eyes squeezing shut and coming open, and a low sound forced out of it that Renew felt in the floor of the gallery. But it did not rise. It did not turn on the warden. It did not make the fast, quiet decision that had ended 7 handlers. It pressed itself harder against the wall beneath the young woman, and it fixed its eyes on her face, and it held. And Renew realized, with a horror that reorganized everything he thought he knew, that the animal was doing exactly what she had asked. She had not asked it to fight, so it would not fight. It would lie there and take the goad and keep its eyes on her and hold, because she had told it to hold, and it trusted her past the edge of its own pain, past 9 years of every reason not to trust anything, and it would go on holding until she told it to stop. "Again," said Osik. They fired the goad again. The beast held. A 3rd warden set his goad to the other flank and fired, and the beast shuddered along its whole length and pressed its brow to the stone and held. And up at the rail the young woman had gone white to the lips, and her hands were locked on the rail so hard the knuckles stood out like stones, and she was saying something now over and over, too quiet to carry, and Renew did not need the words. Hold on, I'm here. I've got you, hold on. This is obscene, said one of the coalition observers in the pale survey sash loudly into the silence. Conditioner, this is torture, not a demonstration. This is a working asset resisting an unauthorized handler's emotional interference, said Vale soon smoothly, stepping to the rail, gold in the noon. It will resolve in a moment. The girl feels the animal's distress. She is soft. She will break long before it does. Continue. And Renew watched the procurement attendant watch the young woman, and he watched her make the calculation she had made from the beginning. The calculation the whole ascendancy had made about the soft-skinned people since the day the survey flagged their impossible world. That softness meant weakness, that a being who could be made to feel could be made to fold. And he watched her decide that the goad on the beast was working too slowly, and reach, in her patience, for the faster lever. Enough, Vale soon said, lifting a hand, and the goads went still, and for a moment Nell's shoulders dropped in relief. And then the procurement attendant turned to the two wardens standing nearest the young woman at the rail and said, in the same warm and pleasant voice, "The apprentice is the controlling input. Bring her down to the animal. If she will not command it from the rail, she will command it from the floor of the ring where she can see its distress up close. Take her arms." The wardens reached for Nell. Afterward, Renew Sesh would tell it many times, to many people, in a great many rooms, and he would never once get it to sound like what it was, because language runs at the speed of language, and the thing itself had run at the speed of the beast. He would say, "They reached for her, and then they had not reached for her, and the beast was at the rail." He would say, "It crossed 90 feet of open ring and a sheer black wall that no asset in the Warforge's history had climbed, and it did it in the time it took two wardens to close their hands on a small human woman's arms, and it did not touch the young woman, and it did not touch the prisoner bound and forgotten in the center of the bowl, and it did not touch a single being it did not need to touch." He would say, "It was very fast and very quiet, and it did not seem angry, and that was the part that stayed with him, that there had been no rage in it, only a decision, the way you decide to close a door." He would say, "The two wardens who had reached for the young woman did not finish the motion." And then the beast was at the rail, its vast slate head level with the gallery for the first time, its 6 eyes gone from the soft, half-lidded calm to something with no bottom in it at all, and the whole gallery had thrown itself backward in a single animal wave. Wardens and conditioners and tribunal and the golden procurement ascendant all scrambling from the rail, goads forgotten, rank forgotten, 400 years of certainty forgotten. And there was nothing between that head and the entire assembled leadership of the Sequoral Warforge, but 8 feet of empty air, and one small woman, in a canvas jacket who had not moved at all. Nell Corin put her hand flat against the side of the beast's jaw. "Easy," she said. "Just that. Soft, the way you'd say it to a dog startled by thunder. Easy, buddy." Her hand on the great trembling jaw, her plain young face 8 inches from 6 eyes with no bottom in them, the whole Warforge frozen at her back. "Easy, I've got you, it's done, they're done." She stroked the seam behind the jaw once slow, the way she must have done 10,000 times on a wooden porch on a world that no longer existed. "That's enough now, that's enough. Come back to me, come on. Come back." And the beast that had crossed the impossible ring, the beast every weapon on Sequoral was now trained on, and none of them dared fire because it stood in the middle of their own leadership. The beast let out a long breath that fogged in the noon air, and lowered its terrible head, and pressed its brow into the young woman's chest as gently as it had in the bowl on the first day, and shook, and was, once more, and to the visible astonishment of everyone watching, a farm dog leaning on the one thing it had chosen. Nobody moved, nobody breathed. "Right," said Captain Doyle, into the ringing silence, in the dry, flat tone of a woman who has been waiting a long time to make exactly this point. "So, now that everyone's seen it," She stepped up to the rail, unhurried, and looked around at the frozen tribunal, the scattered wardens, the gold-robed procurement attendant pressed back against the far wall with her hands at her throat. Here's your operational readiness, Ascendant. Here's your weapon that loves its handler. You wanted the whole coalition to watch you prove you could point it. She let it land. You just proved you can't so much as touch her without it coming through a wall. That's not an asset. That's the girl's dog, and you've spent 3 days making it very clear to everyone in this room what it does to people who put their hands on the girl. She smiled, thin and cold. I did try to tell you. We keep the death world in the house, Ascendant. We just don't hand you the leash. For a long moment the Warforge held its breath, and the only thing moving in all that black stone was the slow rise and fall of the beast's flanks as it leaned into the young woman and came, degree by degree, back down out of the place it had gone. Then Nell said, without turning around, in a voice pitched to Carrie, "There's a man tied up in the middle of your ring. Somebody's going to go cut him loose and give him water. He hasn't done anything to anybody, and neither has Barley, and I'd like the record to show that when you put a monster and a prisoner in a bowl together, the monster spent the whole time worrying about me, and the prisoner is exactly as alive as he was this morning. Send someone down." Nobody moved to send anyone down, because nobody could work out whether moving at all was safe. "He'll let you," Nell said more gently, reading the room. "He's not going to touch anybody who doesn't touch me. That's the only rule he's ever had. That's the only rule he needs." She turned her head a fraction toward the nearest cluster of frozen wardens. "Go on. Water first." "He's been standing in the sun for 2 hours. And it was Renew Sesh who moved, Renew, who found that he had already unhooked the gallery gate and started down the switchback stair before he had decided to. Because a young woman had asked for water for a condemned stranger, while the largest predator in the ascendancy leaned on her chest, and there did not seem to be any part of him left that could refuse her. He went down the 90 steps into the bright bowl under the eyes of the whole gallery and the 6 eyes of the beast, and the beast tracked him the whole way down and did not rise, and Renew walked out across the floor of the ring where 7 handlers had died and knelt and cut the bindings off a gray-scaled raider who stared at him like he had lost his mind, and gave him the water flask off his own belt, and said quietly in the trade tongue, "Drink. You are the luckiest being on this world. You were put in a ring to be killed by a weapon, and the weapon turned out to be somebody's dog." When he looked back up, the young woman was watching him from the rail with an expression he would carry for the rest of his life, and he understood that he had just, in front of the entire leadership of the Warforge, chosen a side, and that the side was the correct one, and that whatever it cost him would be the cheapest thing he had ever bought. They recessed the demonstration, because there was nothing else to do with it. Vale soon withdrew to the high gallery with the tribunal, and the humans were escorted, not seized. No one would put a hand near the girl now, not for any order, back toward the guest quarters, and the beast was left in the ring, and the whole fortress spent the gray evening in the particular silence of a place that has watched its own certainties fall over, and is waiting to be told what to believe instead. Osik Vihar sent for Nell alone, at the dark end of the evening, and to everyone's surprise she went. And to everyone's greater surprise, she took Renew with her as her translator, and Osik allowed it. The High Conditioner received them in his tower, a spare black room high above the ring, with a single wall of daylight panels dimmed now to the gray of the sequoral night, and a wide window that looked straight down into the bowl where the beast lay looking straight back up. Osik stood at the window with his scarred old back to them, watching his ruined asset, and for a while he did not speak. 41 years, he said at last. I have run the rings of this Warforge for 41 years. Do you know how many assets I have broken in that time, apprentice? No, Nell said. Neither do I. I stopped counting in the 2nd decade, when counting began to feel like a weakness. He did not turn from the window. I was very good at it. I want you to understand that. I was not a cruel being, whatever you have decided about me. I was an efficient one. I took the most dangerous creatures in the charted arm and I made them useful, and I told myself that the ones who could not be made useful were defective, because the alternative was to believe that I had spent 41 years killing things that were only grieving, and no being can carry that and go on getting up in the morning. Now he turned. His 4 eyes were very old. Your captain said something to the procurement attendant. She said your people kept the wolves and made them dogs. I have been thinking about it all evening. We did the opposite, you understand. We took the dogs and made them wolves. And we could never work out why the wolves hated us, and now a soft-skinned child has stood in my ring and shown me why in front of my own tribunal, and I find, he stopped. His plate settled. I find I am too old to unlearn 41 years in an evening, but I am not too old to know when I have been wrong in a way I cannot fix. That is a thing they do not teach you here. They teach you to correct the flaw. They do not teach you what to do when the flaw is you. Renew translated it, and did not trust his own voice, and got through it anyway. There's a way to fix it, Nell said quietly. Not the 41 years. That's done. You can't buy those back, and I'm not going to stand here and tell you it's all right, because it isn't, and you'd know I was lying. She stepped up beside him at the window, small beside the great scarred old being, and looked down at the beast that had waited 9 years in his ring. But there's a way to not add to it. You've got other assets. Not the 11 you already put in the ground, those are gone, and that's on you forever, and you'll carry it, and you should. But you told the tribunal you'd solve the whole program. That means you've got more of them, right now, in holes like this one all over your Warforged worlds, being broken, being called defective. She turned and looked up at him. How many, Conditioner? How many right now? Asik Vihar was quiet a long moment. On Sekirol, he said, 1, a young one, taken this year from a world your survey code would recognize, I do not remember which. It has failed 3 conditioners and it is scheduled for the chamber in 9 days. We call it VA Artwell. He looked down into the bowl. It does not lie still like yours. It has not given up hope yet. It still tests the bars. It still screams at the walls at night. The old 4 eyes closed briefly. I have listened to it scream for a season, and I told myself it was resisting conditioning. You are going to tell me it was calling for something. Yeah, Nell said softly, it was calling for something. She was quiet a moment. Take me to it tomorrow. Not to fix it, I can't. I'm not its person, it doesn't know me, whatever it's calling for isn't me, but I can read it. I can tell you what it's lost and maybe where, and your registry can tell you where you took it from, and there might still be somebody on the other end of that scream. A kid on some farm somewhere who spent this year the way I spent 9 of them. She held the old being's gaze. You want to fix one thing tonight, Conditioner. Don't put 12 in the chamber in 9 days. Give me the manifest. Let me try to find its person before you give up on it. That's the fix. Not for the 11. For the 12th. And Renew Sesh watched the high conditioner of the Sekirol Warforge look down at a screaming young beast he had been about to kill, and then at a soft-skinned child who had crossed the galaxy for a farm dog and was now asking him for the manifest of a stranger's grief. And he watched something move in the old scarred face that Renew had never seen there in 11 years, and had stopped believing was in there at all. Bring me the manifest for VA Artwell, Asik said to his aide in the flat tower dark, and suspend the decommission order. Indefinitely. Note in the record that he stopped, and for the first time in Renew's hearing, the Conditioner Prime reached for a human word and found it and used it, clumsy and deliberate, and 41 years too late. Note that the animal was calling for someone, and that we are going to try to find them. They took Nell to VA Artwell in the gray of the next morning, before the noon light came up, and Renew went with her, and so did Asik, which no one expected, because the Conditioner Prime did not visit the lower rings and had not in years. The lower ring was smaller and deeper and darker than Barley's, a narrow bowl at the bottom of a shaft, and you heard the young beast long before you saw it. A high, cracked, ragged screaming that came up the shaft in waves and raised every plate on Renew's spine, because he had heard it every night for a season from his bunk 2 levels up and had trained himself not to listen, and now he was being made to listen, and to know what it was. "That's not aggression," Nell said at the top of the shaft, going still. "You hear that rising bit at the end? That's not a threat sound. God, that's," she swallowed. "That's a lost child sound. That's the sound Barley made in the ditch. They make it when they've lost the pack and they think if they just call loud enough, long enough, something will come. It goes on until they give up. Barley stopped making it years ago. That's what your lying still is, conditioner. That's what compliance looked like on him. He didn't get calmer, he gave up." HFY said nothing, but he came down the shaft with them, which was its own kind of answer. HFY was young, smaller than Barley, its plates not yet fully hardened, its slate hide still soft-looking at the seams, and it threw itself against the bars of the lower ring when the hatch opened, not at them, Renew realized, but past them, toward the opening, toward the gray light and the up and the out, screaming its cracked, ragged call up the shaft to a pack that had been dead or harvested for a year. It did not want to hurt them. It wanted to leave. It had wanted to leave every hour of every day since they took it, and it did not yet understand that leaving was not among the things that were going to be allowed, and that not understanding was the only thing it had left. And Renew saw now that the Warforge called that not understanding defective and scheduled it for the chamber. Nell did not go into the lower ring. "I can't help it," she said quietly, watching the young beast throw itself at the light. "I'm not its person. It doesn't want me. It doesn't want comfort. It wants to go home, and I can't give it that, and pretending I can would just be one more being lying to it." She crouched at the bars, out of its reach, and made a low sound in her throat. Not the name, not a command, something older and simpler, and Renew watched the young beast check mid-throw at the sound and turn its head, and look at the small soft thing crouched at its bars making a noise its lost pack mother might have made, and go, for one moment, terribly still. "But I can read it, and I can tell you it hasn't given up. It's still calling." Which means whoever it's calling for was real and recent and loved it, or it would have quit by now like Barley almost did. She looked up at Osik. "You said you took it this year, from a survey-flagged world. Get me the manifest. There's a person on the other end of that scream, and they've had less than a year to grieve, which means they're not 9 years gone the way I was. You might still be able to put them back together. You have never once in 41 years put one of these back together, conditioner. You could start today. With this one." HFY looked down into the lower ring for a long time, at the young beast that had gone still at a stranger's imitation of a dead mother's voice. And then he did a thing that Renew Sesh would tell his own descendants about, in the years that came after, when the Warforges were something the young ones had only read about. He knelt. The High Conditioner of the Sequoia Warforge, 41 years and untold thousands of broken assets, lowered himself down onto the cold stone at the bars of the lower ring slowly, his old joints protesting, until his 4 eyes were level with the young beast's, and he stayed there, not speaking, not commanding, just present, the way you sit with a thing you have wronged when there is nothing left to say, and leaving would be one more cruelty. And the young beast HFY, that had failed 3 conditioners and screamed at the walls for a season and been scheduled for the chamber in 9 days, stopped throwing itself at the light, and came a few steps toward the bars, and looked at the old scarred being kneeling there, and did not scream. "Bring me the manifest," Osik said, very quietly in his own tongue, not looking away from the young beast, and Renew. "Conditioner. When this is over, when the humans have gone and the tribunal has ruled and I am, in all likelihood, relieved of my command for what happened in that ring yesterday." He did not sound afraid of it. He sounded like a being setting down something heavy. "I am going to spend whatever years I have left finding the ones we can still find, the persons on the other end of the screaming. There will not be many. 11 are already in the ground. But there is this one, and there may be others in the other Warforges, young enough, recent enough. Someone who knows the whole shameful machine from the inside will have to do it, and I find I no longer have anything else I would rather do with my death." He rose, joint by joint, from the bars. "You will help me." "Yes, conditioner," Renew said, and found that his own voice had gone rough. I will help you." They did not know yet that they had run out of time. Renew found out at the head of the shaft, where his aid band pulsed against his wrist with a priority he had not seen in 11 years, and he stopped in the gray corridor and read it, and went cold all the way through. "Captain Doyle," he said, catching the human party at the lift. "Apprentice, we have to move, now." "What's happened?" Doyle said, instantly already moving. "The procurement attendant did not recess to think," Renew said. "She recessed to transmit. She has sent to the councils that the Sequoral command is compromised, that the conditioner prime has been turned by human sentiment, that the asset capability is at risk of walking off-world in the hands of a soft-skinned people who will not share it. And the councils have answered." He held up the band so Doyle could see the Drelo script scroll across it, though she could not read it, and translate it as it came. "An impound order for the beast, for all 4 of you, effective on the procurement ascendant's authority superseding Warforged command. They are to take the asset into secured transit for study and detain the human auxiliary as material witnesses to a capability of coalition strategic interest, pending council review." He lowered the band. "There is a detention detail forming at the guest quarters right now, and a transit cradle being brought up to the main ring for barley. They mean to have you both in a hold before your captain can raise your ship, and they mean to do it while the tribunal is still in recess, so there is no one in the chair to object." He looked at the young woman. "Ascendant soon is not going to try to point him again, apprentice. She has understood that she cannot, so now she means to cut him out of you. Study the capability. Take him somewhere you cannot reach him, and take you somewhere you cannot reach him, and let a laboratory spend a decade working out how the bond is made, so they can make it themselves without ever asking your leave." His 4 hands had closed into fists. "She is going to separate you. That is her plan. That is the only plan she has left, and it is the one thing in the charted arm that Beast will burn the sky down to prevent." The corridor was very quiet. "Then we don't let her separate us," Nell said, and her voice had gone to the flat calm place again, the mountain place, the place Ossick had once mistaken for softness. "Where's my dog right now, Warden?" "The main ring, where you left him." "And the ship?" "Landing Terrace 9. Guarded but lightly, the detail is at your quarters, not the ship. They do not expect you to run toward the open. They expect you to be found in your rooms." Renew was already doing the arithmetic he had spent 11 years learning to do, the arithmetic of movement through a fortress. There is a service route from the main ring to the terraces. Beast transit corridors wide enough for an asset, built for moving them under sedation. They will not think to watch those, because no one has ever moved an asset that was awake and willing along them. He looked at Doyle, then at Nell. "If you can get him to walk beside you, all the way to the terrace, if he does not do the fast, quiet thing to a single being we pass, no matter what they do, we might put all of you on that ship before the detail works out you are not in your rooms. Might. It is a fortress full of beings who have just learned to be afraid of him. If one of them panics and fires if he answers it." "He won't," Nell said. "Not if I'm walking beside him and I tell him it's all right. That's the whole thing you all keep not understanding." She was already moving toward the lift, and the beast 2 levels up had not heard her yet, and somehow, Renew would have sworn, already knew she was coming. "He's not a weapon that loves me. He's a dog that would rather die than scare me. Nobody's going to get hurt walking out of here as long as I don't, so let's not let anybody touch me." She looked back at them, small and plain and perfectly calm in the gray light. "Heal's the easy part. He's been waiting 9 years to heal. Come on." They opened the main ring hatch and Nell walked down the switchback into the bright bowl one more time, and the beast came up off the wall to meet her, and she put her hand flat on the great slate jaw and said, quietly, "We're going home. All the way home this time, but I need you to be so good. I need you to be the best you've ever been the whole way, no matter what anybody does. Can you do that for me? Can you be my good boy through a whole fortress full of frightened people?" And the beast leaned its brow into her chest and let out its long breath, and when she turned and started back up the stair, it fell in at her left side, its enormous head level with her shoulder, matching her step for step up the 90 black stairs. And Renew Sesh watched an apex war beast heel like a farm dog up out of the ring that had held it, and felt something crack open in his chest that he did not have a name for and did not want to close. Then they walked out through the Warforge. Renew went first, because a sub-warden in the corridors raised no alarm, and Doyle and her two handlers went behind, and in the middle walked the small human woman with her hand resting light on the beast's shoulder, and the beast walked at her side through the black stone halls of the fortress that had spent 140 days trying to break it, and it did not look at the walls, and it did not test anything, and it did not make the fast, quiet decision, because the only thing it was doing, the whole way, was keeping its shoulder under her hand. They passed wardens. That was the part Renew's memory would keep sharpest, the faces. They passed a maintenance detail in the third corridor, and the beings dropped their tools and pressed themselves flat to the wall, plates rattling, and the beast walked past them close enough to touch and did not turn its head, because the girl's hand said walk on, and so it walked on. They passed a pair of off-duty handlers who saw the breaker loose in the halls, and one of them grabbed for the alarm panel, and Nell said, without stopping, without raising her voice, "I wouldn't. He's calm because I'm calm. You set off that alarm and 100 frightened people come running with goats, and I stop being able to promise what 100 frightened people will make him decide. So let's all just be quiet and let me walk my dog to my ship, and everyone goes home tonight." And the handler took his hand off the panel, because the small soft thing had explained the physics of the situation with perfect clarity, and the physics were not in his favor. Micro by micro, corridor by corridor, they moved through the fortress, and the fear moved ahead of them like a bow wave and closed behind them like a wake, and not one being raised a hand, because every being who saw them understood in the oldest part of themselves that they were watching something they must not interrupt. At the mouth of the lower shaft, the beast stopped. Nell stopped with it instantly, her hand steady on its shoulder. "What is it, baby?" The beast had turned its great head down the shaft, toward the dark, toward the deep narrow ring where V.A. Artwell was, and from below, faint, came the cracked, ragged, rising screaming of the young beast that had not yet given up, calling and calling up the shaft for a pack that would never come. And the breaker, Barley, stood at the head of the shaft with his person's hand on his shoulder and listened to the young one scream, and made, low in his chest, a sound Renew had not heard from him before. Not the small broken interrogative, not the endless bottomed thing from the rail, but a long, low, steady note, pitched down the shaft into the dark, deliberate answering. The screaming stopped. In the silence that followed from far down in the dark came a single small cracked sound back, a question. And the great beast at the top of the shaft gave the long, low, steady note again, once, and then turned its head back to the girl's hand and walked on. And Nell was crying now, silently, walking and crying, and she said, "He told it something. Did you hear that? He told it something." "What?" Renew said. His own voice had gone. "What did he tell it?" "I don't know his words," she said. "I never did. I only ever knew he was talking. But I know that sound because he used it on the young stock, on the lambs that lost their mothers, the ones that screamed all night in the pen." She wiped her face with the turned-back sleeve, walking, the beast at her shoulder. "It's the sound that means hold on. It's the sound that means somebody's coming. He just told a screaming baby at the bottom of a hole to hold on because somebody's coming." She looked up at Renew, and her wet, plain face was fierce. "So you'd better make that true, Warden. You and the old man. You'd better find its person, because my dog just gave it his word and I have never once known him to break it." "We will find it," Renew said, and meant it more than he had ever meant anything. "I swear it on the name. We will find its person." And they came up out of the last corridor onto landing Terrace 9, into the flat white blaze of the sequoral noon, and the human supply cutter sat there small and battered on the black apron with its ramp already down. And between them and the ramp stood the procurement ascendant veil soon, gold in the daylight, with a full detention detail of Warforged wardens arrayed behind her, goads charged, and a heavy transit cradle on grav lifts waiting off to one side, built to hold a sedated apex. Its restraint collars open and gaping in the sun. "Handler Corin," said Vale soon, warm as ever, pleasant as if the whole thing were a small misunderstanding among colleagues. "You are not on the passenger manifest for that vessel. And the animal beside you is impounded coalition materiel under council authority. I am afraid I cannot let either of you board. Wardens." The detail took a step forward, goads humming. "Sedate the asset and secure the witnesses. Gently. They are valuable." Nell Corin stopped in the middle of the terrace, in the noon light, with the beast at her shoulder and the ship 100 feet away past a wall of armed wardens. And she did not reach for a weapon, because she had none, and she did not run, because there was nowhere to run, and she did not tell the beast to do the fast, quiet thing, because that was the one thing she had promised herself she would never do. She just stood there, small and plain and calm, with her hand on her dog, and looked at the golden alien who wanted to cut them apart, and Renew, standing frozen at the edge of it, understood that they had walked the whole length of a fortress on the single thread of the girl's calm, and that the thread was about to be tested against the one thing it could not survive, which was a room full of frightened beings ordered to put their hands on her. "Wardens," Vale soon said again when the detail did not move, "you have an order, sedate the asset." Nobody moved. Renew watched it happen, and it was the second most extraordinary thing he witnessed on Sekoral, and in some ways it was the greater of the two, because the first had been a beast doing what beasts do, and this was beings choosing not to. The detention detail stood in the noon light with their goads charged and their order given, and they looked at the small human woman with her hand resting on the shoulder of the breaker, and they looked at the transit cradle with its gaping open collars, and they did the arithmetic every one of them had watched get solved in the main ring the day before. That to sedate the beast you had first to approach the beast, and to approach the beast you had first to come near the girl. And that the last two beings who had reached for the girl had not finished the motion, and the detail, to a warden, declined. "I gave you an order," said Vale soon, and for the first time the warmth was entirely gone. "With respect, Ascendant," said the warden at the front of the detail in a voice that shook only a little, "we have all read the report on VAR9. We have read what it does when someone touches its handler. You are welcome to demonstrate the correct approach yourself, and we will secure the animal the instant you have it sedated." He did not lower his goad, but he did not raise it either. "We are wardens of the ascendancy, Ascendant. We are not stupid ones." And that was the moment the whole thing broke. Renew thought, not with violence, not with the fast, quiet decision, but with a mid-rank warden on a landing terrace politely explaining to a procurement ascendant that her authority did not extend to physics. "Then I will do it myself," said Vale soon, and she took a goad from the nearest warden's hand, and she turned toward the girl and the beast, gold robes bright in the noon, and Renew started forward with a cry already in his throat, because he could see exactly how this ended, and it ended with the golden alien learning the thing the 7 handlers had learned. "Ascendant," the voice came from the terrace mouth, flat and old and absolute, and every head turned. "Put it down." Osik Vihar had come up onto the terrace, and he had not come alone. Behind him, spilling out into the white noon, came the whole recess tribunal, the 2 members of the Ascendancy Oversight who had witnessed the demonstration, and the cluster of coalition observers in their pale survey sashes, and the scaled low delegation, and a dozen wardens and conditioners besides. The whole audience Vale soon had so badly wanted the day before, and so badly did not want now. Drawn up out of the fortress by a sub-warden's quiet word, passed to a survey observer an hour ago in a corridor, which was the other thing Renew Sesh had done with his morning, and the reason he had gone cold when he read the impound order, because he had already set the counterweight moving. "You are relieving me of my command, I have no doubt," Osik said, crossing the terrace slowly, his 4 old eyes on Vale soon. That is your right, and it is deserved, and I will not contest it. But I am, at this precise moment, still the conditioner prime of this warforge, and asset handling on these terraces is still, at this precise moment, my authority and not yours, and I am telling you to put the goad down before you kill yourself and take half of this tribunal with you, because that animal is calm for exactly one reason, and that reason is not you. He stopped a few paces from her. You wanted the whole coalition to watch you master the human capability. Turn around, Ascendant. They are watching. Show them how you master it. Walk toward the girl. Vale soon did not walk toward the girl. She stood in the noon light with the goad in her hand, and the entire assembled leadership of 2 civilizations watching her, and she made the calculation, and the calculation came back the way it had come back for the detention detail, the way it had come back for the maintenance crews and the off-duty handlers, and everyone else on Sekoral who had stopped being able to lie to themselves about what they were looking at. There was no approach to the girl that did not go through the beast. There never had been. And so there was no way to take the capability, because the capability was not a thing you could take. It was a bond, and it lived in the 8 inches between a small woman's hand and an apex predator's jaw, and the only way to hold it was to be the one the beast had chosen, and no council in the charted arm could vote you that. Captain Doyle, said the senior coalition observer, into the silence, a tall pale being with a survey sash and a voice like a slow tide, for the record of the neutral corps. Is it your position that the Ascendancy has attempted this morning to detain the civilian nationals of a coalition member species and impound their personal property in order to extract a strategic capability by force? That's my position, Doyle said. For the record. And is it your intention to report this to the full coalition assembly and to your own government in exactly those terms? It is. The senior observer turned its slow tide of a gaze on Vale soon. The neutral corps will also be reporting, Ascendant. We have watched an empire spend 3 days trying to take from a soft-skinned people the one thing they possess that it cannot build, and fail, publicly, in front of witnesses it summoned itself. I would think very carefully about whether you wish the second sentence of that report to describe an abduction on a landing terrace, or whether you would prefer it to describe a procurement ascendant who, upon reflection, released the newcomers with the Ascendancy's compliments and a formal apology. The tide receded. The distinction will matter a great deal in the Assembly to every young species currently deciding whether the Ascendancy is a partner or a predator, and there are a great many of them watching this one, Ascendant. As you knew, it is why you wanted an audience. For a long moment Vale soon did not move, and Renew watched her hold the whole ruin of her plan in her 4 hands and try to find a grip on it that did not cut her and fail. Then she lowered the goad. The asset, she said, and her voice had gone flat and careful, a being salvaging what could still be salvaged, was determined upon review to be non-compliant and unsuitable for the program. Its continued conditioning represents an unacceptable cost to the fleet. She set the goad down on the black apron, gold robes bright, chin high, rebuilding herself sentence by sentence into someone who had meant to do this all along. In the interest of coalition relations, the Ascendancy releases specimen VAR9 to the custody of the human auxiliary, along with the Ascendancy's complements. Let it be noted that the human method, while unsuitable for procurement at scale, was found to be of interest, and that the Ascendancy conducted itself throughout with the fullest respect for its coalition partners. She turned. She could not quite manage to look at the girl. You may board your vessel, Handler Corin. Take your animal. The Ascendancy wishes you a safe transit. And that was all. No trumpet, no reckoning, no golden alien on the ground. Just a procurement ascendant reciting, in the flat noon light, the face-saving formula of a being who had reached for the one thing in the galaxy that could not be taken, and been made to set it down in front of everyone who mattered. Nell Corin looked at her for a moment. "Thank you," she said, and Renew could hear that she meant it and did not mean it in equal measure, the way you thank someone for finally stopping. Then she turned to the beast at her shoulder and her whole face changed, and every hard thing went out of it, and what was left was just a young woman about to take her dog home. "Come on, baby," she said. "That's it. That's the last of it. We're going home." And she walked toward the ramp, and the beast walked at her side, its shoulder under her hand, past the detention detail that parted before it like water, past the transit cradle with its gaping empty collars, past the golden alien who did not turn to watch them go, out of the fortress that had held it for 140 days and could not, in the end, hold it for 1 hour more. At the foot of the ramp Nell stopped, and the beast stopped with her, and she turned around one last time, and Renew Sesh came forward to meet her, because there was no version of the moment in which he did not. "Warden," she said. "Apprentice. You're not coming." "No," Renew said. He had known it for an hour, and saying it out loud was harder than he had expected. "There is a young beast at the bottom of a shaft in this fortress that my people put there, and there are others like it on the other Warforged worlds, and there is an old being up there." He tipped his head toward Ossic, who stood apart at the terrace mouth, watching, a scarred old shape against the black stone, who has decided to spend the end of his life finding the persons on the other end of the screaming, before the ones we can still save give up the way yours almost did. He cannot do it alone. He does not know how to be gentle. He is going to have to learn at his age from nothing, and it is going to be terrible to watch, and someone has to help him, and it turns out that someone is me. He spread his 4 hands. "I would like to come with you. I want you to know that. I would like to see this world of yours where the death world sleeps in the house. But there is work here that I am uniquely ruined enough to do, and I am going to do it." Nell looked at him for a long moment, and then she reached into the inside of her canvas jacket and took out something small and worn and pressed it into his upper hand and folded his 4 fingers over it. It was one of the photographs. The first one. A small human child asleep in a patch of yellow sun with a gray-gold pup curled around her, its head on her belly, both of them impossibly, ordinarily at peace. "Take it," she said when he tried to give it back. "No, take it, I've got it up here." She touched her temple. "I don't need the paper anymore. I've got the real thing standing next to me for the rest of both our lives. You need it more than I do. You're going to be down in those shafts trying to convince a screaming baby that somebody's coming, and some days you won't believe it yourself, and on those days I want you to have this in your pocket." She pressed his fingers closed again. "This is what you're working toward, Renew Sesh. Not a weapon, not an asset. This. A kid asleep in the sun with a monster that would die before it let the sun touch her wrong. That's the whole thing. That's the only thing. You keep that where you can find it, and you don't let anybody on any Warforged tell you it's sentiment, because it's not sentiment. It's the most powerful force in the charted arm, and your whole empire spent 200 years trying to build it out of fear and never once managed it, and a farmer's kid did it by accident with a screaming orphan in a ditch." She stepped back. "Go find them. Everyone you can. And when you find the person that belongs to the baby at the bottom of that shaft, you tell them Barley said hold on. You tell them my dog kept his word." "I will," Renew said. His voice had gone entirely. "I swear it on the name." "On the name," she agreed. And then, because she was who she was, she crouched down and cupped the great slate head one more time in front of everyone and said, "Say goodbye to the nice worried one, baby. He's going to fix what they did to the others. He's one of the good ones." And the beast lowered its enormous head and pressed its brow, for one moment, against the chest of the subwarden who had helped to cage it, and then helped to free it. Gently, the way it did the thing it did to only 2 people in the world. And Renew Sesh stood in the white sequoral noon with an apex war beast's forehead against his chest, and a photograph of a sleeping child folded in his hand, and understood that whatever else his life had been and whatever else it would be, it had contained this. And that it was enough. Then the girl and the beast went up the ramp, and Doyle and the 2 handlers followed, and the ramp lifted, and the battered little human cutter closed itself up around the strangest cargo. it had ever carried and lit its engines against the black apron. And Renew stood beside the old conditioner prime, and watched it climb up through the flat bright noon of Sequoral and dwindle and gutter, out among the day-blue stars. For a while neither of them spoke. They asked Earth for a weapon, HFY said at last to no one to the sky. Do you remember, the whole council? We asked the soft-skinned people for a beast conditioning cadre, weapons grade, and they sent us 4 keepers and an apprentice, and the whole mess hall laughed. His 4 old eyes did not leave the place where the ship had been. The apprentice walked into my ring and my warforge and my entire civilization's understanding of what a beast is, and she walked out again with the most dangerous asset I have ever held healing at her side like a farm dog, and she never once raised her voice, and she leaves behind her a suspended program, a ruined procurement ascendant, a report that is going to be read in every young species council in the arm, and an old fool who is going to spend his death trying to undo 41 years. He was quiet a moment. We did not misunderstand the request, Renew. That is the thing I keep arriving at. We asked for the most dangerous thing Earth had, and they sent it. We simply could not recognize it because it was small and quiet, and it loved something, and we had spent 200 years being certain that those were the marks of a thing that was weak. Yes, conditioner, Renew said. Not conditioner, the old being said. Not after today. I expect I will be Citizen Vihar by nightfall if I am fortunate, and something worse if I am not. He turned, at last, from the empty sky and looked down toward the mouth of the lower shaft, where, faint on the noon wind, the young beast Va Artwelve had begun again to scream its cracked, ragged call up into the light. But it was different now, Renew thought, or perhaps he only wished it different, pitched a little less like despair, and a little more like a question, as though somewhere in the long night the young one had heard a low, steady note come down the shaft and had decided, against all the evidence of its short-caged life, to believe it. Well, said the old being who had been the conditioner prime of the Sequoral Warforge, it appears we made someone a promise. Come. We have a manifest to read, and I do not know how to be gentle, and you are going to have to teach me before that one down there gives up. We are, I am given to understand, already running late. 9 years late if the pattern holds. He started toward the shaft, slow, joint by joint. Let us try to make it fewer for this one. And Renew Sesh put the photograph of the sleeping child into the breast of his warden's coat, over the place where his own hearts were, and followed the old being down into the dark to keep a beast's promise to a beast, which was, he was coming to understand, the only work in the charted arm that had ever been worth doing. The report went into the coalition assembly the way a stone goes into still water, and the rings of it were still spreading a year later. Renew Sesh followed them from the bottom of one shaft or another, on one Warforge world or another, in the company of a disgraced old being who was learning, slowly and badly, and with a stubbornness Renew had come to love, how to be gentle. They had lost the command at Sequoral within the day, as Osik had promised. The tribunal relieved him, the ascendancy struck his rank, and the council, scrambling to control the damage the neutral core had done them, had done the one thing that turned out to matter. Rather than bury the old conditioner prime, they had given him, quietly, a mandate no one else wanted, because no one else could be blamed for it. Find the non-compliant assets that could still be salvaged. Determine their origin. Where possible, and where it served coalition relations, effect. The memorandum had actually used the human phrase, translated stiffly, no one on the drafting committee quite sure what it meant, affect reunification. It was slow, ugly, heartbreaking work, and most of it failed. Most of them were too far gone. Most of them had done what Barley had almost done, and what the 11 had done all the way, given up, stopped calling, gone still in the center of a ring and called it compliance, and there was no manifest and no reunion that could reach a thing that had already decided the footstep was never coming. Renew learned to sit with those ones too. He learned that you did not always get to fix it. He learned that sometimes the only gentleness left was to not put a thing that had suffered enough into a chamber with a sloped floor, and to let it live out its days unbroken in an open pasture on some quiet world, screaming at nothing, waiting for no one but alive, and not a weapon, and never again a weapon. It was not a happy ending. It was better than the ending the Warforged had written for it. Renew came to believe that better than the ending they would have written was, on most days, the most a being could honestly aim for, and that aiming for it anyway was the whole of the thing the girl had tried to teach him on a landing terrace with a photograph. But some of them they reached in time. The young one via Artwelve they reached in time. Ossic pulled the manifest that first night, as he had promised, and the survey code on it led to a world Renew had never heard of, a deep frontier human settlement 3 transits out, and the record was recent, less than a year. And when the old being's stiff, careful message finally worked its way through the coalition relays to the local authority and back, the answer came in the form of a girl. She was 11. She came off a transport onto the terrace at the holding station where they had moved VA Artwelve, small and plain and furious and terrified, with a survey officer on either side of her and her whole thin body shaking. And she had a name in her mouth that she had been saying for a year to no one. And when they opened the holding pen, the young beast that had failed 3 conditioners and screamed at the walls for a season and been 9 days from the chamber came across the ground at her like slate lightning. And every warden on the terrace flinched, and the girl did not, because the girl knew exactly what was coming, and what was coming was her dog, who had heard a low, steady note come down a dark shaft one night and had believed, against everything, that somebody was coming. Renew stood at the edge of that terrace, an old alien's photograph of a different sleeping child folded over his hearts, and watched an 11-year-old human wrap both arms around the head of a monster while it pressed its blunt nose against her throat to feel her breathe. And he thought, he kept his word. Barley kept his word. And then he found he could not see the terrace very clearly for a while, and Ossic Vihar put one 4-fingered hand on his shoulder and left it there, and neither of them said anything, because there was nothing that needed saying that the 2 of them, of all the beings in the charted arm, did not already know. The girl's name for the beast, it turned out, was Cricket. She had named it Cricket because when it was small it had made a sound like the insects in the long grass behind her house. An apex war beast of the Sequoral inventory, a decommissioned scheduled asset, a thing that had cost 3 conditioners and a season of screaming named Cricket by an 8-year-old, for the sound the bugs made in the summer grass. Renew wrote it in the record. He wrote all their names in the record, everyone they found, the true names, the little names, in a column the ascendancy forms had no field for and that he added himself and dared anyone to make him remove. Barley, Cricket. And the ones after, a great slow-eyed thing a farm boy on a different world had called Biscuit, a scarred old female a widowed grandmother had raised and named, in her own human tongue, a word the Matrix rendered as sweetheart. A young pair of littermates 2 brothers had called, with the flat poetry of children everywhere, Big One and Other One. Renew kept the column. It became, over the years, the truest history of the Warforges that anyone ever wrote, not the tonnage and the conditioning schedules and the operational readiness figures, but the little names, the summergrass names, the names that told you, if you knew how to read them, that not one of these creatures had ever been wild, and not one of them had ever needed breaking, and every last one of them had been, before the collectors came, somebody's. And the ring spread. The neutral core report and the little names in Renew's column did between them what no fleet could have done. Young species read it and drew their conclusions, and the ascendancy found the whole arm suddenly cool toward its recruiters and its survey teams and its beautiful warm offers of partnership. The great Apex Asset Program, 400 years old, was not abolished by any vote. It simply became, one embarrassed council at a time, a thing no one would admit to having supported, and the collection ships were quietly reassigned. And the rings, one Warforge at a time, went quiet and stayed quiet, and eventually a few of them were turned into something else, and Renew lived long enough to see one of them. The deep bowl on Sequirrel, the one that had held barley, planted over with an open pasture where the assets that could not be reached lived out their unbroken days in the noon light. And where, on certain afternoons, the old ones who came to tend them swore you could still hear, faint on the wind, something that was not quite screaming anymore. And through all of it, off in the corner of the record where no council thought to look, the story got out and would not be put back. The story the whole mess hall had laughed at. The story that stopped being a joke and became, quietly, the single most repeated thing anyone in the charted arm knew about the soft-skinned newcomers from the impossible world. The Ascendancy asked Earth for a weapon. Earth sent a dog keeper. And the dog keeper walked into the deepest warforge in the fleet and walked back out again with the weapon healing at her side, and never once raised her voice, because she had not come for a weapon at all. She had come 9 years across the dark for a farm dog that slept in a doorway, and she had found it in a hole, still checking every hour of every night for a throat that wasn't there. And she had said its name over a rail, and it had said hers back, and the galaxy had learned, all at once and far too late, exactly what it had let in when it opened the door to the people who kept the death world in the house and called it by little names. It was many years before Renew Sesh finally stood on the world where the death world slept in the house, and by then he was old himself, and the beings who ran the little frontier port had to be told 3 times that the elderly 4-eyed alien in the plain traveling coat had once been a Warforged conditioner, because he did not look like anything at all anymore except tired and kind, which was, he had decided, an acceptable thing to end up looking like. Ossic had not lived to make the trip. He had died 2 winters back, in a chair in the sun, at the edge of a pasture full of unbroken beasts, an old being who had spent the end of his life reading little names into a record, and had, by the count Renew kept and would not let anyone dispute, put 14 grieving animals back into the arms of the persons who had lost them before it was too late. 14, against the 11 he had put in the ground in the years before. It did not balance. Renew had told him so once near the end, gently, because the old being had seemed to be trying to make it balance, and Ossic had said, "No, it does not balance. Nothing balances. You do the next one anyway," and had gone back to reading the manifest, and that was the last true thing Renew ever heard him say, and Renew had carried it down more shafts than he could count. The human world was small and green and violently, absurdly alive. Renew's survey training screamed at him the whole way in from the port, hazard ratings on the pollen, on the water, on the ordinary 6-legged things that droned in the grass, on the grass itself. And the humans walked through all of it barefoot and unbothered, children rolling in it. And Renew understood, in a way no report had ever made him understand, that Doyle had not been exaggerating on any point. They had been made by a world that spent 4 billion years trying to kill them, and it had not made them hard. It had made them keep things. He found the farm at the end of a long dirt track, in the gold light of a late afternoon, and he stood at the gate for a while before he went in, because he wanted to look at it first. There was a low house with a wooden porch. There was a field behind it, turning gray-gold in the autumn the way the grain must have turned on a world called Vesper's Landing that no longer existed. There were stock animals, the fat placid earth kind, grazing unafraid in the near pasture. There was a woman in the field, not young anymore. Renew saw, her brown hair gone iron at the temples, her plain face lined by years and weather and, he hoped, more good days than bad, walking the fence line with a bucket in one hand, doing the small unhurried work of a place that was hers. And in the long grass by the porch, in the last of the gold light, lay the beast. It was old now, too. The slate hide had grayed at the seams to match the woman's temples. The notch in the left ear fan had gone soft-edged with the years. It lay in the grass with its 6 eyes half-lidded against the low sun, and its enormous head on its crossed forelimbs, exactly as it had lain in the center of a ring on the first day Renew ever saw it, except that everything about the stillness was different now, because this was not the stillness of a thing being patient about a footstep that never came. This was the stillness of a thing that had the footstep, had it for good, had had it for years, and had finally stopped needing to check. And even as Renew thought it, the great old head came up and turned and tracked the woman along the fence line, and settled again only when she was walking back toward the house, and Renew understood that it had not stopped checking at all. It had just learned to do it in daylight, at leisure, from a patch of warm grass, with no fear left in it anywhere. The beast saw him at the gate. Renew went very still, the old warden's stillness, and waited to see whether 9 years in a hole and everything the Warforged had done would come up out of the animal at the sight of a four-eyed shape in a conditioner's build. The beast lifted its head. It looked at him for a long moment across the gold field, with its 6 old eyes. And then, unmistakably, along the great grayed ridge of its spine, its hindquarters began the slow, heavy geological sweep that Renew had last seen in the bottom of a ring, and it did not get up, because it was old and comfortable and the sun was warm, but it lay in the grass and wagged at him, the worrying one, the nice worried alien the girl had told it to say goodbye to a lifetime ago. And Renew Sesh stood at the gate of a farmhouse on a death world and wept without shame, the way he had learned, at last, that a person was allowed to. "He remembers you," the woman said. She had come up the fence line without his noticing, the bucket set down somewhere, and she was smiling, and her plain, lined face was the most welcome thing he had seen in years. "Of course he does. He never forgets the ones who worried." She opened the gate. "Come in, Renew Sesh. You're just in time for the evening. You'll stay the night." "You'll stay a great many nights if you've got them. I've read every message you sent, all 14 of them, and there's a chair on that porch with your name on it and a great deal of catching up to do." She looked at him a moment longer, reading him the way she read everything. "You found them. 14. I know. He'd be proud of you, the old man. I'm proud of you." A breath. "Come and sit down. You've earned it." So Renew came in and sat on the porch in the last of the gold light, and the woman brought out something warm to drink that his stomach would regret and his hearts would not, and they talked, the two of them, about the years and the shafts and the little names and the old being who had died in a chair in the sun trying to make an unbalanceable thing balance, and about the 14, one by one, all of them, Cricket and Biscuit and Sweetheart and Big One and Other One and all the rest, alive somewhere on their own green worlds, sleeping in their own doorways, checking their own persons in the dark. And the beast slept in the grass below the porch while they talked, deep and slack and unguarded, the way it had never once slept in the ring, and every little while it woke and lifted its great gray head and found the woman with its 6 eyes and reassured itself and put its head back down. Late, when the gold had gone to the long blue earth dusk, and the drone of the deathworld grass had come up all around them, the woman went down off the porch and knelt in the cool grass beside the old beast, and Renew watched her do the thing he had crossed a great many years to see. She lay down beside it in the grass, the way she must have lain 10,000 times on a wooden floor on a world that no longer existed, and she pressed her face into the soft seam behind its jaw, and she said its name, low, the 2 soft syllables, soft on the first and falling on the second, the name that had once stopped a whole Warforged dead at a rail. And the old beast let out its long breath into her hair, and it turned its great blunt nose, gray now, worn now, and pressed it to the pulse in her throat, and held it there, checking, feeling her breathe, the way it had every hour of every night since it was small enough to sleep on her chest, and would every hour of every night until one of them ran out of nights. Renew Sesh sat on the porch in the dark of a death world, and watched a woman and a monster fall asleep in the grass with their breathing already matched, and he thought about a council that had asked for a weapon, and a mess hall that had laughed, and 11 graves and 14 little names and an old being in a chair in the sun, and he found he had, at the very end of a long and terrible and finally redeemed life, only one thing left that he was certain of, and it was this. They had never sent a weapon at all. They had only ever sent someone home.